All right. Good morning, everybody. We'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. This is a Select School Facilities Committee meeting, and we are in Jackson, Wyoming. And today is the 22nd of August. Before we open up for comments with the co-chairman, Ashley, can you go ahead and just call roll and we'll get that out of the way, please?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. Senator Brightman,
Excused?
Senator Hicks,
Yeah.
Senator McEwen,
Excused.
Do we have anybody online?
Yeah. Excused.
Senator Rothfuss,
Excused.
Representative Harshman,
Here.
Representative Oakley.
Here.
Representative Olson,
Here.
Representative Storer. Vice Chairman Landon,
Here.
Chairman Brown.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you, Ashley. And with that, I'll open up the opening remarks here to co-chairman. Senator Landon, any opening remarks?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Not many this morning. Always work to do in this particular meeting. Our job is to sort through some things and make some recommendations on up through the governor with the help of the commission and the director and his staff. So I look forward to the day. Thanks.
All right, committee, don't have much either. We'll go ahead and hit the opening decorum policies. I don't imagine we're gonna have a lot of food fights or anything thrown in here, but please keep the comments civil and let's have discourse, not fighting. With that being said, the only other opening comments that I have are appreciate everybody being here. I know this was a tough battle for those going through the election season and whatnot over the past couple of days. So I appreciate the travelers and I appreciate everybody online being here. So the only other thing that I will say is our goal today is to actually finish up a little early based off of our agenda. So comments and questions will be concise if at all possible. And we will try to, the expectation from my side as a chairman is that the committee has always read the information. And I don't want us to rehash and re-ask the information that's already been reread. So just appreciate that if there's questions that is in the materials, just let us know that it's in the materials. Don't have to go back into that any further. Staff, anything for us opening up before we roll right in? Seeing some heads nod. So with that, the only other thing I will say is I want to thank Teton County as well, Teton County School District for opening up the facility here today, as well as our facility tours yesterday. And for those that did miss, very eye-opening experience. We got to see somewhere that was built in 2000, where we have overcrowded conditions in our high school, something that we have allocated some funds to. We got to see Munger Mountain, which is the newest facility here in Teton County. And then we got to see probably one of the oldest facilities, which is their bus barn. And lucky for us, it was 85 degrees and not 22 degrees outside. So we had a very, very good and informative tour and we got to see exactly what we were wanting to see. So I appreciate that and I appreciate the hospitality. So thank you, Superintendent. And with that, we will move right into our first topic, which is our draft legislation. And Tanya, if you want, you're more than welcome to just stay over there. You don't have to change everything over. So. And it looks like the first one that we have is the routine maintenance worker calculation.
And Mr. Chairman, if you'd like, we can go through both of the bill drafts. It's your preference. Matt's memo covers both bill drafts. So there's two options. We can either take them individually and then go over the fiscal impacts together. How would you like to handle that?
Let's go ahead and do that. Let's go through the memo. I think that's probably best, and then we'll kind of break it down individually afterwards, if that works for you.
Mr. Chairman, just from a structural standpoint, it might be helpful to go through the two bills first.
Okay.
To get a framework for what the bills actually do. And then I'll summarize just from the fiscal standpoint what the impacts are. Is that okay?
That's perfect.
Okay.
That'll work.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Tanya Heitrick, Legislative Service Office. At the last committee meeting, you requested a bill draft to eliminate the operating expenditures as a factor in the maintenance workers computation, the routine maintenance operations contained within the education resource block grant model. And walking through the bill, section 1, page 1, line 10 through page 3, line 13, operationalizes this modification to the education resource block grant model beginning in school year 25-26 and each year thereafter. One item to note is that we did not go into attachment A in this bill draft to make this modification. We felt like as a staff, Matt and I talked about it pretty extensively, and this level of detail isn't contained in attachment A, so it doesn't lend itself well to go into those documents to operationalize this particular modification or refinement to the education resource block grant model. The fiscal impact for this bill is relatively minor, $2 million. That's contained on section 2, page 3, line 15 through page 4, line 6. This appropriation is from the Public School Foundation Program account. You might recall that the CapCon account was eliminated, I think, 2 years ago. And so all appropriations for public education come from this account now. And that is designated to the Department of Education's School Finance Division for the routine maintenance component as modified by this act. Page 3, line 8 contains the effective date, and that date is July 1st of 2025. Subject to your questions on this particular bill draft, Mr. Chairman, and then we can move into the second bill draft.
Committee, any discussion on the first bill draft? This one was pretty straightforward. Do we have any questions online? Anybody? Doesn't look like it. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and roll into the second one, please.
Mr. Chairman, 25 LSO -155, committee formal draft 1.0, school finance routine and major maintenance calculation. Recall at your last meeting, you requested staff prepare a bill that does two things. One, increase the allowable square footage utilized in the major maintenance computation from 115%, which is current statute, to 135%, and increase the multiplier in the major maintenance calculation from 2% to 2.5%. And beginning on page 1, line 10, this is section 1. It amends two separate statutory provisions to operationalize these directives. Page 2, line 1 through page 3, line 10 amends 21-13-309. This operationalizes the directive to align in the maintenance and operations component of the education resource block grant model. You can think of this perhaps as a conforming amendment that was required as a result of the policy choice made to increase the allowable square footage. You can see the substantive amendment on page 3, lines 5 through 8. It begins in school year 2025, and you can see there that the 115 is stricken and the 135 is inserted. The next amendment begins on page 3. This amends 21-15-109. This is the statute governing major maintenance calculation. And this modifies, again, the major maintenance calculation from 115% of the allowable square footage to 135%, and increases the multiplier to 2.5% for school year 2025 going forward. You can see those substantive amendments on page 5, lines 7 through 9, and 15 through 17, and page 6, lines 2 through 4. The appropriation is contained on page 6, line 7 through page 7, line 16. This creates section 2 and appropriates $38,100,000 for the changes to the major maintenance calculation. And then if you look at subsection B on page 7, lines 2 through 16, this appropriates $5.5 million, again, from the Public School Foundation Program account to the Department of Education for the modification of the routine maintenance component. The effective date of this act is contained on page 7, line 18, and it's July 1st of 2025. Subject to your questions, Mr. Chairman.
Committee, any questions on this one? Again, pretty straightforward, but there was a lot of discussion on this previously, and I do remember there being a lot of discussion before this. So if there's any opening comments or questions on this particular, Senator Hicks?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. This increase in this for the square footage.
Matt?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman and Senator Hicks, the appropriations are in two separate pots. The 135% is a conforming change to both the education resource block grant model and the major maintenance model. The amounts within the education resource block grant model just become part of the block grant. There's no restrictions on how school districts expend those dollars. The increase, the larger increase, the 38 million to the major maintenance is allocated to the district's major maintenance allocation, and those are restricted to the parameters of that allocation. Does that help?
Yeah, and that's what I was trying to understand is the major maintenance stuff still comes back through SBC, and we look at that as part of that as a separate budget, correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, the major maintenance expenditures are reported to the State Construction Department. I think that they go over some of those in their annual planning, but I would defer to Director McComey on that particular question.
Director, put you on,
So let me, if I may, Mr. Chairman, please,
sure.
before you answer that. So again, I'm just trying to get, so when we look at 21-13-309, that just goes into an increase in the foundation. That's the allocation. So we really don't know whether it's going to be spent for that or not. Because
Mr.
it's just part of the overall block. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, that is correct. There's a nuance. The piece in the education resource block grant model is the routine maintenance component. The piece in 21-15-109 is the major maintenance component. And the major maintenance component, the State Construction Department has a much more involved role in overseeing those expenditures. But the routine maintenance component, which is in 21-13-309, and the lesser amount, the $5.5 million, is contained within the block grant, and there's very little oversight and expenditure of those funds.
Thank
Del,
you.
if you don't mind introducing yourself, and then if you have anything else to add.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delbert McComey, Director for the State Construction Department. As Tanya stated, the major maintenance, we have oversight on that. So we work on the calculations and present that for a budget item with through this committee and the legislature and the commission. As far as expenditures and how those occur, the districts, when they need to expend major maintenance funds on a major maintenance project, those come through our office, and we take a look at those to make sure those are compliant with statute to be able to do that. And then the districts annually report on the 680, which will be discussed later today in the annual report. They bring all that information in a report this time of the year. I think it's due. The reporting mechanism starts July 1st. And then we also, through our annual meetings with the districts, they report to us on, what they're planning to use major maintenance funds on their items, their ones and twos or poor or fell type of items. So we have yearly discussions, basically through our project managers, weekly discussions on major maintenance.
Thank you.
All right. And then I see Senator Beitman. Did you have a question, Senator?
Mr. Chairman, I was just having a hard time hearing
Yeah, can't-
Senator Hicks. He wasn't speaking into his microphone, so I didn't hear any of his questions. So that was it for now.
Okay, I appreciate you letting us know, and we will make sure that that microphone is operational and being utilized. So, yes, Mr. Coachella.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So really quickly, and I see Senator Rothfuss has joined us this morning. It's good to see him. He will know about all of the conversations we've had in this regard over the last decade. But Matt, I'm looking over at you. Would you help me to know the last time that we ever adjusted this? Do you have that information off the top of your head?
Mr. Chairman, I do have a footnote in my issue brief I provided in June. I believe the ratcheting down of the allowable square footage from 135% to 125% to 150%. I think that finally occurred in 2009-10. I will go back and verify that. And then, and that was again done both to the major maintenance formula and the routine maintenance formula within the education resource block grant model. There was a period of time where the legislature allowed that calculation to be larger than it is today, to give districts in the state time to eliminate excess square footage and allow buildings to be built to the commission's adequacy standards. When the state inherited that inventory in the late 1990s, it had the commission develop those adequacy standards. And as these new buildings get built to those, that's really the impetus behind that calculation.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Wilmarth, appreciated you giving us a little overview of that. Bottom line is, I think we haven't really adjusted these amounts since 2009. So we ratcheted down, and now I think it's a good consideration for us to at least have this conversation. So maybe the director wants to weigh in on that too.
Senator Rothfuss, before we go to the director, did you have a question or discussion?
No, I think Senator Landon's exactly right. And I do believe it was our last meeting when we had the memo from Mr. Wilmarth that kind of provided that little bit of history on when we made those changes to reflect that scaling down.
Okay. Mr. Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The reason that I asked the committee to look at adjusting the major maintenance calculations as an interim topic really was dealing with the fact that I truly believe that we need to be funding at the amount necessary to maintain our buildings, which in the long term, yes, it increases annual biannual budget amount. But there are studies that were performed back when I was previously director that talked about if we can get the right amount of major maintenance going in there, the amount of capital construction or extending the life of our buildings would be substantially increased. And if I recall, I think the number was more than $3 billion in overall savings to the state in the life expectancies of our buildings. And that's really why I came to the committee to say, let's take a look at that. Again, and I think it's the 2018 timeframe, there were some adjustments that the select committee and the legislature made on funding in general, because you may recall for those members on the committee that had been here during that timeframe, for example, when you had a new building, there was the first year, there wasn't any major maintenance, and then it went to like a 10%, a 20, 30, and it ratcheted up over a 7-year timeframe to where they got the full major maintenance. And that was changed to where now when you get a new building, you get full major maintenance. So there have been some adjustments since I was director in 15 to be able to do that. But I think that we need to be funding that at those recommendations that were made back in the 2018-19 timeframe by our consultants. So.
Okay, committee. Yeah, Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. Dale, what's your current budget now under the current formula for major maintenance? What does that generate on an annual basis?
Mr. Chairman, I'll have to have the staff get me that information. My book's over. It's,
Committee, just for edification here, one of the discussions that was outlined, we chose to have this particular bill drafted, but there is a discussion as well that the director just alluded to that we did briefly touch on about doing the major maintenance calculation at the square footage of the building and doing basically the building itself and not calculating it off of the ADM. So kind of a situation where if you have kids in a building, but the amount of kids in that building no longer resides with that building, you still have to take care of that building. And so that was one of the topics as well. And there was discussion on what the constitutionality of that looked like and what that kind of boiled down to. We chose not to move that bill forward. After having some offline discussions with the director, it sounds like there's some opinions that counter that, but I think that might be worthy of at least consideration. There's nothing saying that we have to move these two bills forward today, and we could certainly have a further discussion on what we want to do with this and make sure that we're doing this right. These ad hoc pieces tend to ebb and flow. And I think it's all a decision on what we decide. You know, we certainly push forward a bill right here, and just seeing what we've seen over the course of the past couple of days with elections, I look at a bill with a $40 million appropriation. I don't anticipate it making it through legislative rigor in both houses and being signed into law by the governor. So kind of a tough discussion to have, but Mr. Director, did you have that information?
We're still looking up the exact amount, but I believe it's 176 million and change for the biennium. So half of that on a yearly basis.
You know, that
Mr.
Mr.
Chair?
Chairman, not to belabor, but I think you point to some valuable things to consider as enrollments decline, and in many of our districts, that's what's going on out across the state. You know, our physical plant and maintenance crews are still having to take care of the same amount of square footage, the building doesn't change. And so I think the select committee will have to ponder that and think about how much do numbers of students really drive this maintenance picture. You know, and I think it's a good conversation that we're having.
Yeah,
Senator Hicks?
Mr. Chairman, I do think that's a really good conversation to have. So how do we track, and this is a question for you guys that have been on the committee for much.
It was. I don't think it's working. So we'll do this for right now.
Yeah, this one, for some reason.
Yep.
Is having problems.
There we go.
So what happens when we get to, because I'm familiar of we had a school in Carbon County that kind of went through this a number of years ago, that enrollment declined, a little coal town called Hannah. And then we have this giant school building there and hardly any kids in it. And so what's the trigger, the determination then to go in there and mothball part of that school and put that into more of a preservation component versus trying to keep the whole thing up to adequacy when it's the whole building is not even being utilized? How does that trigger happen?
Mr. Chairman, that's actually a school district decision. We don't have any trigger mechanisms in rules or regulations that would say how you would do that with the school on declining enrollment. I guess from a maintenance standpoint, you probably would see just about as much major maintenance anyway, because you can't necessarily block off the HVA system from the part of the building you shut down for the other. I mean, the boilers are still going to be running. The roof is still going to need a total roof repair or repairs at some point in time, not just partial part of the building, the envelope, the walls, those sort of things. So really all you'd be saving is wear and tear maybe on carpet and paint and those sort of things in that mothballed portion of the building.
I think ultimately, and Mr. Chairman, in the scenario that I'm talking about, the decision come back that annual and major maintenance costs has exceeded what a construction of a new school to fit the community was in that particular scenario. And It's just something that I think as we go and we do see declining populations in certain part of the state and increasing populations, that we have some way to at least capture that.
Mr. Chairman, I will say that I think the districts are doing a pretty good job of getting rid of buildings and that excess square footage, because it is a cost to them, not only when they have a smaller school, say they have two schools and one's 50%, they're both 50% full. Well, their administration costs and things like that are extreme on that. So what I'm seeing across the state is they are going in and consolidating schools to save on block grant type funding sizes, as well as then on the major maintenance work. So just coming back since November, God, I'm thinking it's probably like 8 or 9 different buildings have been shut down already, come to the commission for disposal. So we're seeing that happen across the state with the districts. And in, I think, Riverton, again, previously when I was director, really started kind of that comprehensive review. We did a Mercer study with them to look at all of their facilities and what that was costing them for major maintenance. And they shut down the tax center. That was funded for disposal, and some other schools. We just had a commission meeting up there recently, and they're looking at again shutting down some other schools and consolidating based on the number of students that are there. So we're seeing that happen. Obviously, for Hannah, the school, it's hard to shut that down and consolidate because it's the only school. But in the larger districts that have more than one building, we are seeing a number of buildings mothballed or disposed of.
And I think you said it perfectly, that at this point with the 115, it's actually a cost for them to hold on to that square footage. It's not I mean, when you're not generating any revenue to take care of that building because there's no students in that building, it becomes a cost. And so I've seen it firsthand in Laramie County. They're getting rid of the old stuff. I think it was pre-99 that we started seeing this information coming through. So I think it's the districts, as you said, Director, are doing a good job of trying to get rid of that excess square footage because it's costing them. So committee, any further discussion on the secondary bill? Yes, Senator Hicks.
Yeah, so I do think you brought out a pretty poignant point about $40 million appropriation, but the question comes back, and the reason I asked the question on what's your current baseline budget, that's just the baseline budget. So we still appropriate based on whatever recommendations is on major maintenance and look at where we are financially. So even without the bill, you could still come back and ask for additional money for major maintenance through the appropriations process based on what your list is. Is that, I mean, historically, that's what we've kind of done.
Director?
Yes, so I have the firm number for you. In the annual budget right now, it's $176,112,379. We are required to come before the committee and ask for supplemental requests if required based on the changes in the CRV value and some other items. That will be discussed later today for that request, and that becomes part of our standard budget. I believe Senator Hicks is referring to the component projects. So we supplement major maintenance for individual projects for the districts that they may not have available funding for. Your smaller districts, and particularly districts that say have a school building or 2 school buildings, it's hard for them to keep up with their major maintenance the way it's currently funded when they have some large dollar items come available. My poster child for that, where we really started pushing for more component level requests back in the 2016 timeframe, was actually in Carbon 2, and it was their high school. And the ductwork had been built and made out of a fiberboard at that point in time. And it was 30 some years old, and that was just disintegrating and coming apart. And if the district had taken all of their major maintenance dollars and saved them for 10 years and not spent it on anything else, they didn't have enough money to replace that system in that one school. So to augment the major maintenance dollars, we have a program that and again, today there was a request for more component funding. There was component funding last time where we go in and look at individual items that really the districts may not even have the money for, or it would hit them so hard they couldn't do some of the stuff that we're expecting is coming up in future years for them.
Thank you, that helps, 'cause that was component level funding.
That's correct.
Yes,
But that doesn't come out of the 170.
let's make sure, let's go ahead and make sure we,
Yeah, so
Yeah,
Mr.
thanks.
Chairman, thanks for that clarification. So that component level stuff is the supplemental request above and beyond the normal square footage they get for major maintenance. All right, thank you.
okay. In committee, I think conversing with the co-chairman here, Matt, let's go ahead and go through the memo here, but I will say, let's be brief, and because I think we've got an idea here kind of behind the dais, but be brief on this for the fiscal impacts and what you've got there. And then we can go from there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matt Wilmarth, LSO, Senior School Finance Analyst. This memo is agenda item 3-3. To speak to the first bill, 22 LSO or 25 LSO 154. Just the background on this, if you recall from the conversation in June, we walked through the calculations for routine maintenance components. And one of the components discussed was the maintenance worker allocation resources through the K-12 funding model or the education resource block grant model. And under current law, the maintenance worker calculation includes 4 initial factors to generate a base FTE. One of those factors is the school district's operating expenditures from fiscal year 2004-5. So fiscal year 2005. And for every $5 million of their operating expenditures from that fiscal year, it receives a 1.2 FTE as part of the averaged base FTE calculation. During the 2020 recalibration, your legislative school finance consultants, Picus and Auden, recommended to remove that as a factor in this calculation. So this bill essentially just forwards that maintenance worker calculation from the 2020 recalibration. It removes the operating expenditures as a factor and then averages the 3 remaining factors. The impact of that of this bill is to do that, and the appropriation, the $2 million equates to about 30 maintenance workers that are additionally generated across school districts. That's the bill. It's as simple as that. We have beefed up, as Tanya indicated, we beefed up the language in here because the attachment A that's codified in law or referenced in law doesn't get to level of detail that provides the recommendation from your consultant. So we have essentially forwarded that through that language.
Okay. Committee, any questions on that for Matt right now before we head into the next bill? Seeing none, that'll work, Matt. We'll go ahead and roll into the next one then.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I should have opened up with this comment is any refinement, if these bills move forward and are chosen to be sponsored by the committee, any refinement to these estimates will be done through the fiscal note process that begins in November. These are just the initial estimates. So I just wanted to caveat, give us some cover there. The second bill, 25 LSO 155, which you've had a majority of the discussion on. That bill, again, there's 2 primary changes. The first is the maintenance or the multiplier to the major maintenance formula increases that from 2% of the cost replacement value to 2.5%. And then secondarily, it does the increase in the allowable square footage from the commission, where a school district receives the lesser of 135% of their allowable square footage or their actual. And under current law, it's 115%. So it's the increase from 115 to 135. That provides an additional $2 million under the 2 million square feet under the education resource block grant model and 2.6 million gross square feet under the major maintenance model. The total estimated impact in total is approximately $43.6 million. $38.1 million is the dynamic impact when you change both the square footage and the multiplier. And when you increase both of those, that would be appropriated and put under the standard budget under the major maintenance formula. And then the 5.5 million would be an additional amount under the routine maintenance calculation under the education resource block grant model. That goes towards their block grant. The commission has oversight under 21-15-109F to oversee that additional expenditure of major maintenance funds and approves those expenditures. With that, Mr. Chairman, that is the fiscal impact or the estimated fiscal impact, and we've aligned the appropriations with that estimate.
Okay. Committee, any questions for Matt before we move on? And I'll kind of give us a little bit of direction here. Seeing none. I think what we're going to do after conferring with the co-chairman on this is I think there is at least a value of the discussion to have the bill draft in front of us that we have currently and get a little bit more finite details through the fiscal impact side of things. But I also think having the discussion on the building itself being taken care of regardless of ADM. And I know that's an in-depth bill, but it's an in-depth bill that I think it's necessary and worth having this discussion on whether or not we're taking care of the buildings or we're taking care of the buildings only when there's children in them and the maximum amount of children that they can hold. So I'm going to ask LSO to go ahead and draft that bill for us at our next meeting. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take these two bills that we see right here, and we're going to bring those forward to our next meeting as well. And we will have a final vote for both of those, as well as the discussion on the next one, the next meeting, if there's any discussion on that.
Mr. Chairman.
Public testimony as well.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and just a suggestion when I look at this, because I think there's some merits, particularly in looking at the major maintenance component is your co-chair may want to discuss this, but to separate those bills out and have two separate bills. One would be the square footage, because you got different appropriations. Part of that appropriates into the block model for the custodial workers. But it looked to me like that could be broke into two separate bills.
Tanya, you,
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, you're referring to the modification of the 135 and the 2%. I think you can break out the 135 and the 2%. Those could be two separate bills, but the modification to the 135 within the routine maintenance component is a conforming amendment required as a result of changing the major maintenance formula. Both of those historically have mirrored each other with the percentage of square foot that the state allows. And on the bill draft, Mr. Chairman, are you directing us to eliminate any calculation driven by ADM? And how would you like, so all existing square footage in the state would be reimbursed for major maintenance? And does that include enhancements?
to my recollection from the last discussion is it would not include the enhancements, because the enhancements are funded at the local level. And therefore, those are going to be required to be taken care of at the local level. So I would not include the enhancements on there, but I do believe that it needs to be taken care of that again. And it's the idea, and I'll work with you guys on what the discussion is, and myself and Dell as we're working through the bill drafting process. But the discussion I think really does need to be on, are we taking care of the building, or are we taking care of the building only when we have students in there? And then what is that, I guess, what is that delta of we get enough money to take care of a building once there's X amount of students, and where does that come down? And is it the greater of those two, or do we always fund X amount, you know?
So, yeah, Mr. Chairman, under the current law, the district receives the lesser of their actual square footage or whatever their ADM amount is under the commission's allowable square footage calculation. But that is then multiplied by under current law, 115%. So the district gets their actual square footage or 115% of their allowable, of the commission allowable square footage allotment. It's the lesser of that amount. So we're eliminating that commission adequacy standards will inherit all of the square footage, less enhancements. It's enhancements that have been built by districts post Campbell. School districts that have built enhancements, or that would be considered an enhancement under today, a pool. So if a pool was built before 1999 or 1998, whenever the state's adequacy standards came on board, those are all grandfathered in. So that's under the current formula as well when we look at educational square footage. So that's, I just want to make sure everybody's made aware of that. But you will see an increase probably comparable to whatever this bill draft has in it today under 155.
And committee, the only reason I'm directing staff to do this is I do think that it's worthy of us as a committee to have all the information in front of us. And it does become a policy decision. Do we go in and do we change what we've been doing post Campbell 4 and the work that we've done and completely upend everything and just say we're taking care of the building regardless of students? And or do we go in and we just keep what we're doing and we make sure that we fund adequately at the 125? And I think it's another piece of the conversation that's also been happening over the past couple of years of we spend too much money on our schools. I think this committee has to dive in and decide, do we want to take care of the assets that we have built? Or do we want them to continue to be, kind of piecemealed together and hope that we can keep them operational for the 50-year lifespan that we have them on? And I know Laramie County in particular, but some of the others have some buildings that are pressing that 50-year mark and well beyond. So Matt, did you have another?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm not clear on one piece of the square footage, and perhaps Director McComey has a recommendation as well. If you recall from June, there is a secondary calculation or analysis for the non-educational building. And that is if the proportion of the district's warehouse and office building is a certain percent of the total educational square footage, they are either paid at 100% of that square footage, 90%, 80%, or 70%. So let me walk through that calculation. If a district's proportion of their office and warehouse buildings is 10% or less of its educational square footage, then it's allowed 100% of that office and warehouse square footage. If it's greater than 10%, but less than 16%, they are allocated 90% of that office and warehouse in the major maintenance calculation. And it goes 16 to 21, they get 80%, and 21% or greater, they get 70%. So my question, I don't know where the director is on this, but as part of that bill draft request, do you also want to provide for 100% of the office and warehouse square footage as well?
And my direction to you, and we can have this discussion as a committee and we can hear the public testimony at our next meeting. I'll direct to go ahead and have that drafted in there. Again, I think what we see with these discussions is the convoluted nature that we have made in funding schools and how we've got there. It has become almost unattainable to understand. And even going back to Senator Hicks's previous question, and when you have the current bill draft that we have right now, yes, it goes into the block grant model, but it's also gone in tandem with our major maintenance calculation that we see coming into us. We've made this an incredibly difficult conversation to have where there isn't nuance involved in any way, shape, or form. So I know this is going to be a lengthy bill, and I know this is going to be a tough bill to draft forward, and I'm sure we'll probably also have a legal analysis on it as well. So I would also ask for any type of constitutionality from our attorney side of things to make sure that that's included as a memo for the committee to have for justification as well. Committee, anything further on this before we go to public comment? Senator?
Mr. Chairman.
Well, Mr. Chairman.
Senator
let-
Office,
let's
I'll
go to
get
Sen-
you.
Let's go to Senator
Okay,
Office. first.
Senator Office.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, reflecting on the idea of redrafting this to open it up, I guess I wonder if that's a road we even need to go down. The way the bill's drafted, we have total flexibility on what the multiplier is for the gross square footage. If, for example, we took the bill draft we had right now and changed the 135% to 250%, for example, or whatever the number is, so to speak, that exceeds whatever any district is, it is functionally equivalent to what you're asking for, but it's an easy draft. It doesn't take new work. It doesn't take new drafting, but it effectively changes the cap to what would be higher than what any district would be running. We've seen the analysis of where districts are, and we could actually dial it in such a way that, and I think we have to a large degree with 135, right? 135 hits almost all of the districts, but not all of them. And I don't recall what the number is that effectively gets all, but maybe one or two. And it might just be an easier approach for us to contemplate that aspect, and then rather than restructure statute, adding a single paragraph which would allow districts to petition the commission for an exception for some short time. So we're tracking it, right? So if we set it at 135, but they need 150 and they've got a good reason, then allow the commission to make that recommendation and go back to what Senator Hicks was talking about, where maybe that comes to the legislature for that year for a recommendation. It would just, from a drafting standpoint, be adding a paragraph, leave it relatively clean to what we're doing right now, and allow the effect that I think is a positive effect, which is an acknowledgement that we want to keep the square footage as modest as it can reasonably be for the school fleet that we have, being sensitive to students, but at the same time respecting what you're laying out, which we've talked about a million times, which is that when the students change by a few, it doesn't change the square footage of the school. So there's no way to do that. So I guess I'd just like to, before we have a new draft done, discuss the idea of just using this draft, tacking on perhaps that one more paragraph, and being sensitive to the idea that while we scaled it down too much at 115% pretty clearly, I don't know that the 135% doesn't achieve almost everything we're looking for. So I'd like to hear your thoughts, co-chairman's thoughts, and maybe anybody else's thoughts on taking that approach rather than restructuring the way that we've been doing it.
Okay, I do see Matt's got some comments.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, in Senator Office, to that point, under the current law, the 115%, 4 school districts receive all of their square footage being funded under the current formula. Moving it to 135%, 18 of the 48 school districts would have their total educational square footage funded for. So you're still missing approximately 30 school districts under the proposed bill draft. Statewide, the percentage under this year is 142%. So you would capture some more districts if you moved the 135 to 142 or 145. But your highest under the calculation for school year 23-24 was in Big Piney at 229%. The second one was Fort Washakie at 206%. So there are some districts that are substantially higher than 115, 135, 145.
So I'll go over to Senator Landon, but I do have some comments for Senator Rothfuss here in just a second. Co-chairman?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I just as a general comment and to move it up to about a 30,000 foot view, we have newer members on the committee this year, and I think I just wanted to point out the difficulty of some of these kind of conversations. And I'm looking down at Senator Hicks, who has chaired Select Water. Ironically, this setup was actually set up exactly like Select Water. It comes through a commission's recommendation. We pay attention to what our agency has to say, but ultimately the select committee makes a recommendation on up through to the legislature. The challenge for me has always been, I've been on this committee a long time, is do we present to the best of our ability? Do we try our best to reflect where our district's set out there and what we think needs to happen? That's really, we weigh that against, well, do we really favor something like this? Maybe not that much necessarily, but I often in the past, we have set it on down the line so that these policy considerations can be given to the legislature as a whole. So I think we're on track. I think this is important stuff. This one hasn't been adjusted for a long time. And we've got districts out there that are struggling to maintain their facilities. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out, Mr. Chairman. That's always the balance beam right there.
Absolutely. So,
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Office, I'll come over to you. Give me
Thank you,
just a
Mr. Chairman.
second here. So the discussion that I would say what I'm attempting to accomplish with my bill draft versus what we do by just adjusting the numbers, we become static versus dynamic. And my positioning on this is once we build a building, we're going to have to take care of that building. And so if we say we're going to take care of 100% of the square footage and we put that into statute, we take care of 100% of the square footage. It's no longer, well, we're going to do 100% based off of ADM or the greater or the more allowable. We just take care of the building. And that becomes an issue for the state to say, we're going to take care of the buildings. And then the other portion of this, while I don't disagree that having at least some level of discussion from the legislature's point of view on that paragraph that you mentioned, that then becomes in itself a political nightmare. And I never, ever in a position want to put Big Piney in a position where they are on the House floor and we're holding up an entire state budget because maybe or maybe not they didn't use $40,000 for a piece of major maintenance that they were supposed to use. That becomes an inherent political risk. And personally, I don't want to do that with the buildings that we're building in this state. But that being said, back over to you, Senator Office.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, and I think those last points about turning it into a political debate are well taken. With regard, though, to the idea of treating new schools and making sure that we're maintaining new schools versus existing fleet, I think that is a delineation that we haven't hit on that is an important delineation. As we're building new schools, we're intentionally right-sizing those schools to a projected future. And it is true that if then the population falls, it really makes sense for the state to be on the hook. But the original scaling down was obviously designed to recognize the districts like those that Mr. Wilmarth was talking about that have, around twice the square footage of what is effectively adequate space. And how do we deal with those types of legacies? That pressure was supposed to make it more cost effective to scale down and find alternative solutions. The concern I have about simply opening it up, in addition to the concern of just, I think this bill draft with a changed number effectively gets there. But I go back to the circumstance that we had for a number of years with groundskeepers, for example, in the funding model, where there was no limitation pressure on the number of acres that a district held or anything along those lines. And as a result, you had the unintended consequence of particularly large districts having no reason or rational motivation to right size anything. I see that potentially being an alternative challenge where when there's no constraint on the number of square feet, there's no pressure and the cost is entirely footed by the state regardless of the number of square feet. I don't see what the pressure is then for the district and for the state to be thoughtful about, well, what is the right size of schools? This district looks like it's about half, getting back to the Hannah example of Senator Hicks. The district is about half of what it was before, a quarter the size of what it was before. We have costs associated with that, and we want to recognize it. So those are just concerns again. And I'm also, just for my management council hat, sensitive to drafting requests if they're not the direction that we're going to go, if they do lead to new complications. And so I'm always just kind of thinking about the workload. If that is a direction that the committee is really interested in removing the cap and entirely, then it's going to be worth the endeavor. But if in the end we're going to go with the percentage bill, I feel like it's better to be thoughtful about the adjustments that are available through the existing bill draft. And I feel like the existing bill draft, by changing that number, and Mr. Wilmarth provides great analysis that maybe we need to see higher than 145%. I'd be curious what it would cost to go to, 175, for example, which would then capture most of the state. That might be a relatively straightforward solution. It sounds like we'd have to actually go to about 250% or higher to capture all of the districts, and that we're not capturing that many at 135. So it sounds like 135 is insufficient, but that could perhaps be something that we consider for the next meeting. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, committee, we're going to stop discussion on this. We're going to open this up for public comment. If there is any public comment on any of the discussions that we've had thus far, and or the potentiality of a bill draft coming forward, if there's any discussion on that. Seeing nobody jumping up. Oh, yep, Ken, please.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Ken DeCario, Wyoming School Boards Association, and I'm speaking in support of these two pieces of legislation. I've heard some interesting discussions, and I've sat through a lot of these meetings over the years, and actually all the way back into my legislative career when we started down this road. And I think one thing you have to remember about the multiplier is how long do you want a building to last? And that discussion's gone on. And in fact, in this legislation you have in front of you, you see that it was supposed to go to 3% at one time, because if you want a building to last longer, you want to take care of it. And some of this was driven early on by the state wasn't taking care of their buildings. And I would say to you, the conservative position is you don't let the roof fall in before you fix the roof. A conservative position would be that you take care of it as it goes along. You fix the things that need to be fixed. And so it's important that you take care of the buildings and the space you have. I think it's also important to remember that some of these buildings are pre-Campbell. And when the people built them, those buildings, they built them under their own needs, and they were paying for those buildings out of their local resources. And I know that's water under the bridge. But the only other thing you can do with some of those, if they have excess square footage, there's a solution. You could tear down the building they have now and build them the right size building. I'm just not sure that's cost effective. It doesn't seem to make sense to me that that's the road you would go down. It seems like you take care of that building that they have now and you help them maintain those buildings so that, the adequacy standards are met for the students in those buildings. So some of these adjustments I think make sense. I think, they have to go forward. And the other thing I would actually say too is I think the job of this committee is you recommend what you think is necessary. You can't think of all the eventualities of what happens. And I know it's hard not to do that. Believe me, I'm realistic. But I really think this committee needs to, you get the better testimony, you get lots and lots of it. You are in the position to make a much better informed decision about what the proper recommendation is. And so I think that's the recommendation that needs to be carried forward to the body. We all know. I spent 13 years in the legislature. I know how things work once they hit the floor. But I just don't think you can plan for all those eventualities. And at some point, you have to make the proper decision and make the right recommendation to do what you think needs to be done. And nobody wants to build those buildings. The other thing about the excess square footage is, the state was building these buildings. And so at some point, that excess square footage problem sort of takes care of itself, although nobody knows what's going on with enrollment. I think we've seen that. The most recent example of that was the pandemic. We saw that enrollment dropped. Well, those buildings were built for the enrollment that they anticipated being in there, and all of a sudden you don't have the kids in there. You still have the building, but you don't have the same enrollment. And so you never know. Some places, Laramie County, the enrollment's going up, Teton County, the enrollment's going up. So that's one. Some places the enrollment's going down. It's hard to plan for all those things, although that is part of the process. You task school districts with looking 5 years down the road at what you think those projections are going to be. Well, they're making the best possible projections they can, but I mean, if they had a crystal ball, the world would be much, much simpler for everybody. So, Mr. Chairman, I applaud these two pieces of legislation. I'm not sure I want to get into the other parts of the other bill. When I see that and can, make an informed decision and comment on it, I would be happy to do that. But with that, Mr. Chairman, I would encourage you to move these bills forward and then take them on. And I know you're not making a final vote today.
Any questions for Mr. DeCaria? Seeing none. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman, members of the committee.
So committee, as chairman's prerogative, I've directed, but I guess I will open it up. There is a competing discussion here between myself and Senator Rothfuss, and I certainly don't discredit the committee's discussion on this, and I understand the amount of work and task that would create on staff to recreate this new piece of legislation. So I guess I'll ask the committee for kind of a gut check on this as to whether or not we want to see the bill that I have recommended in our next meeting, or if we want to take the current bill and just continuously try to dynamically fix this as we see fit. What's the committee's feelings on this? Senator Hicks?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I guess I'm gonna, I think Senator Rothfuss is on the right track with this. Obviously, there's a few things I'd like to see, but there's base funding already available in the bill, and so we're talking about a percentage. I do think there's some merits to exploring the idea, no different than we do with the component level funding, that those districts, and I think the information that Matt Wilmar provided us on, even the 115 and 135, we're not even getting all the districts. I'll take a little contrary to view to you. I honestly think the idea of just allowing those districts to come in and petition the commission and then make a recommendation, just like they do on the component level funding to this committee every year, is probably something that has a higher probability of getting some of that stuff funded than just putting a block of money available in there. Back to Senator Landern's discussion, that is what we do with select water. These committees are set up very similar. The fundamental difference is those projects come in those omnibus bills every year, and they have a pretty high rate and success of passing. I think in the environment that we're dealing in now, the more people get a look at that, you're right. And some of these are going to get debated on the floor. But if we really want to go down this and try to increase some of the routine maintenance for these districts, in particular these ones that are way outside the 115 or the 135%, that has a higher probability of probably making it through the legislature than the current draft or a new draft that just says we're going to fund all maintenance on square footage. That's just my thoughts.
Matt, did you have something else?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, not including the multiplier from 2% to 2.5%. So take that off the table. Just increasing the 115% to 175%, as Senator Rothfuss mentioned, that would increase your funding under the major maintenance formula approximately 19.6 million and capture 40 of the 48 school districts total educational square footage. So you're getting a lot closer at the 175%. And it's round numbers, 20 million per year increase in the major maintenance formula, not including the 2.5% multiplier.
Co-chairman?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I think there's a lot of wisdom in what Senator Rothfuss has shared with us this morning. I would kind of favor going forward with these two pieces. I think we can have a good policy discussion on this. You know, I don't know whether we land on 135, 175. We can discuss that in November or October when we meet next, and adjust that level accordingly. That will give us a little bit of time that maybe Mr. Wilmarth can provide us exactly, you know, 3 or 4 options that we might want to consider. But I think this bill effectively does what we want to do, and that is to take this maintenance discussion to our colleagues. And it's been a while since we've raised these levels, and I think it's appropriate that we're taking it forward. But I think we've got the instruments to be okay, Mr. Chairman.
Well, committee, I will go ahead and pull my directive from staff, but what I will do is make a new directive and what I would like for our next meeting. And I think we can probably vote if you guys would like. We can vote on one of the bills. The secondary bill, I do think that we need maybe a little more discussion on. And what I would say is give us the breakdown. And once we hit the full, I think you said 206% or whatever that is, what that would actually cost us. Give us some of those options into our next meeting so we can finally encapsulate everybody in there versus the 40 of 48 and where we sit today.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if you look at page 304 of the memo,
Yep.
And this is under the discussion of 25 LSL 155, table 2 has matrix on the multiplier and the percentage. I'll increase that percentage to the 230%. And I'll just give you a matrix that, and then it provides how many districts under each of those scenarios are funding their total educational square footage.
Perfect. And I think, yeah, I mean, if you just take a look at where we're at right now, you know, we're talking a roughly $50 million appropriation to do this, right? We're going to potentially upward going near double that. And whether or not that's a sellable feature for this committee to bring forward is a totally different discussion, because the committee makeup that we have here, we're not going to have the discussion to bring that back out. It's going to go in front of a brand new appropriations committee and certainly to a new different looking legislature coming up on January. So,
Mr. Chairman, I wanted to thank Mr. Wilmore.
Yep.
Thank you for reminding me that the table was there.
Yep.
That's more than adequate. I think we can have that conversation. Regarding the second bill, Mr. Chairman, I agree with you. I would suggest that the committee could move the maintenance worker calculation bill forward. I'm talking about LSO 154. And my only concern would be whether or not, knowing that we would take a vote on it, as to whether any other public comment on that bill. But I would think we could move this bill.
okay. Is there
But
any
it's up to you,
public
Mr.
comment
Chairman.
on this particular bill beyond? We'll just reopen that back up and just see. I didn't see anybody rush into the microphones earlier, so. Okay. All right. So with that, then I'll open the floor for any motion on this particular piece. Senator Rothfuss?
Yeah,
Did you have
Mr. Chairman,
something?
it was on just following up on the previous discussion. So sorry to be jumping back a little bit, but I appreciate the course. I think it's a good one for us to see the rest of the lines there. But a couple of thoughts there. One is, you know, I don't think it will be twice as much, but it will be obviously significantly more. But I did just want to remind the committee, and I've said this before, but I think it's important to continue keeping this in discussion as we think about the 2.5% major maintenance multiplier. It's important to realize that we're not doing anything in this bill draft and really don't have the capacity to do anything about how we calculate the value of the buildings through RS means on a square footage basis. So it's important for us to communicate to our colleagues that 2.5% is 2.5% of a number that's dramatically lower, probably 50% of what it would really cost for us to build those buildings. We don't have a ready way to address that, but I think it's important to keep that in mind. And then the final thought, getting to the comments and discussion about how this might be a challenge to get through appropriations. I think one thing for us to discuss and convey to the appropriators is that these are better spent dollars than new school dollars. If we wanted to prioritize something that's critical for the state of Wyoming for school facilities, it would be to fully fund major maintenance. And we all know that. But I think when it comes to our prioritization, when we're making budget requests moving forward, even though there will be a substantial appropriation on this bill, I guess it would be important for us to convey that this appropriation is more important than the other appropriations that we're going to ask for, because this is the one that saves the state money in the long run rather than provides expenditures. So those are the final thoughts, and I appreciate the direction, Mr. Chairman, to move this forward to the next meeting and discuss that with additional information. Thank you.
All right, appreciate it. I'll open the floor for any motions.
Mr. Chairman, I would move 25 LSO 154, the school finance routine maintenance worker calculation bill. I would move that we pass.
Okay. Committee, there's been a motion, seconded by Storer. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and call for roll call. Ashley, please call roll on 24 or 24, 25, 25 LSO 154.
Mr. Chairman, on 25 LSO 154, school finance, routine and major maintenance calculations. Senator Brightman,
Aye.
is it? Oh, yeah, I wrote the wrong tab. So it is actually,
It's 154.
yep, I've got the wrong one. I apologize.
That's okay.
So it
We're
is,
gonna recall that roll too, just to make sure that we have that done correctly.
Just to
Yep.
make sure Senator Biden.
I've got LSO 154, school finance, routine maintenance worker calculation.
Correct. Thank you. Go.
Senator Brightman,
Aye.
Senator Hicks,
No,
Senator McCune. Still excused.
Excused.
Senator Rothfuss,
Aye.
Representative Harshman,
Aye.
Representative Oakley.
Aye.
Representative Olson,
Aye.
Representative Storer,
Aye.
Vice Chairman Landon,
Aye.
Chairman Brown.
Aye.
We have 8 aye, 1 no, 1 excused.
All right, committee, and then for just follow up on that, we will see 155 rehashed, and we'll have a table of some information brought forward to the next meeting. That puts us a little ahead of schedule already. That puts us at our 10:15 break, so I think we'll go ahead and take a quick break. Be back here, let's call it 10:05, and then we'll roll right into the responses for committee inquiries. So we will take a break and be back by 10:05. I'm only 1 minute behind. I believe we've got everybody back online. So since we've got everybody back online, I've got a quorum and that'll allow my co-chairman to grab his coffee and a few others to come back in. But you're good, Mr. Chairman. So we're going to roll right into our next portion here. This is the responses to committee inquiries from the June 25 meeting. And we've got the entire brigade here coming in from State Construction. So welcome. Again, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and roll right into it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, Delbert McComey, Director for the State Construction Department. And I have with me today Laura Anderson and John Rexis. So anything that I need to punt on, I'll ask them to weigh in and help provide information to the committee on. So again, it's a pleasure to be here and talk about some of the items that came up from the last meeting. First of those is charter schools. And, it's been an interesting, voyage in dealing with charter schools, going back to the 2015-16 timeframe. The state had 4 charter schools with the rules and regulations, statutes that were in place. We really got involved as a department for funding on leases, dealing in the 4th year that they were in progress. And as the committee's aware, this past year, there was legislation passed that directed payments to begin immediately for the charter schools. And so we were in the process of trying to do a little bit of catch up, because following how the budget sessions and things like that work out, Mr. Chairman, you may recall I was at the Education Committee same time you were, and we asked for some supplemental within that committee to go through joint appropriations for the budget, just based on that 1 year direction in there. And we had a couple of charter schools that we hadn't been funded that we would have to start taking into account immediately. There's also, as you're aware, Mr. Chairman, the ability for one more charter school to come online. And there is one charter school in Cheyenne that is actually wasn't up and running, but they're in the process of coming online this year. And then in 2028, I believe the restriction on the number of charter schools perhaps goes off unless there's some change, and who knows what that may bring. So in dealing with some of those changes, we've been working fairly hard with the individual charter schools that we're aware of, some of them that are being contemplated up here in the Alpine area. There was a school that's being contemplated. There's also a virtual charter school being contemplated in Cody. We've been visiting with those folks. And then also with the I don't know if board's the right way to say it, but there's the groups that represent charter schools. We've been working with them also on a number of different issues. And so with that, there's some issues that we've seen that have kind of come up. We worked through some of those. They're in the book, but we've worked through some of those and have a better understanding. And I still want to talk about those with the committee today, because it took us, and we do this on a daily basis, it took us a little bit of digging with WDE, digging with ULSO staff to come up with some, here's actually what the statutes say, or here's how WDE functions and how that comes back and interacts with our calculations on payment for the leases. And then there's also items that we are required to deal with, and that is looking at, is there the availability of school district buildings and how that could affect not only future charter schools, but the charter schools that are in place right now, and what does that look like? And, my discussions with those charter schools in their leasing, for example, and some of the nuances there. So I want to talk a little bit about those items also. So, Mr. Chairman, if I may, what I'd like to do is start off and start working, discussing with the work in progress, that's on, the first page under item 5. And the first, heavy bullet point there. And that's the language, in the charter school application, that's under, page 5 of, section, 2A, resource and operations. And, what that denotes, and this is dealing with a charter school application, itself, we're required, the SCD is to provide some information in that application form, on, the availability or the adequacy of school buildings for the charter school. And, to some degree, we can do that, but it's a little bit of a chicken and the egg issue, in that, they're making application to WDE for their charter school. And what we're finding is that the charters don't have a school already purchased or a building already purchased or something in a district because they're making their application. And certainly, I think as a business person, you'd probably recognize you wouldn't want to go out and buy something when you haven't got permission to do anything yet. And so it's a little bit, again, for us, it's a chicken and the egg. Now we can, so there's 2 issues with that. One is, are there non-district owned buildings? And in that application, they ask us to assess that. We don't have statute authority to go out and assess private buildings. And so we have conferred with WDE on that. And then the second one is that the charter schools generally, as I mentioned earlier, do not have the ability for a school for us to assess prior to that time in the application. So prime example of that is, say, in the Alpine area right now, they don't have a building. They don't know if they're going to build a building, or there isn't a school building in Alpine. They don't have a school there. So that's not there, but there's nothing for us to assess one way or the other. And yet the applications requiring us to make that in there. So kind of long story short is a couple of things. Number one, we've visited with WDE, visited with Trent Carroll a couple of times, and I think they're going to change that application format to reflect some of the items that I just talked about. When there's a building available, if it's a non-private building, we're more than happy to go out there and assess that building for adequacy and condition. We have all the school buildings already. We have the condition reports and those sort of things on them. It's not a heavy lift for us to be able to go do that. Private buildings, we don't have the authority. Our attorney general's told us we don't have the authority to go out and tell a private individual what they need to do in their building or change in their building. And I certainly wouldn't want to go there. We do make available for the charter schools on our website. They have access to the adequacy standards. So when they're looking at perhaps having a building built or leasing a building, they can take that and use that information to try and conform as closely as they can with what we're doing on the regular district side of those buildings. So I thought it was, again, important to bring that to your attention. And on the last white bullet, that would be on page 2 at the top under that item that I've been discussing. There's a proposal that we've talked with WDE to read about, and it says if a charter school proposes to be operating within a facility or a portion of a facility currently owned by the local school district, include a letter from the state construction department verifying that the district-owned facility is available and adequate for the operation of the charter school. So I believe that's how that's going to be amended in the future to look at. And again, that's when they have it available. So whatever point in time that is, we can forward that to WDE. It may not be on the front end when they're making their request to form a charter school and such a grade configuration. If there's no questions, Mr. Chairman, I'll move on to item number 2.
Committee,
which
any
is the second
discussion
big
on the
bullet
charter
point.
school portion? Dell, I think I just want to make a quick comment. I think you highlight an issue that this is exactly why we did not just open the floodgates on charter schools. This is exactly why we did not go, okay, well, just any charter school that wants to come in here can go after it. And we have a lot of opening a small business, I learned very quickly, you have a lot of small things that you have to fix as you're going along before the rush comes in. Senator Rothfuss, you've got something to say?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to echo that, and this is the tip of the iceberg really on school facilities issues related to charter schools. And as we add more, it becomes more and more clear how complicated it is to include a new school in a district when you're trying to efficiently use space in that district. And when we know that we have an obligation to every child, whether they're in a public charter school or a traditional public school, to be in a safe and adequate school environment. It's interesting, and my question to Dell relates to the AG opinion that we can't be assessing the adequacy of a non-public facility. The question I have is, if not you, how can we be confident that those children will be educated in adequate facilities? Because I can just see the circumstance where we have no way of gauging the adequacy right up until it turns out to be inadequate, and somebody files a lawsuit against us for allowing their children to be in an inadequate school, which we would have done because they leased it, but we have no real ability to enforce or check against that. So, I think this is an area where we have a lot of challenges ahead. It is good that we're taking it slow because we're going to have to figure out how to deal with this. But my question to Dell is, how will we handle this? How will we know if a leased facility is adequate educational space that reaches the standards that we've set out both in statute and through rule?
Mr. Chairman, we have been having that discussion with the charter schools and actually they're advocates for charter schools. So what we proposed that they do at a minimum is when they're working for a lease on a private building, obviously you have your local ordinances, your building codes, those sort of things that the cities or the county would enforce in a building to make sure it's safe. But within our adequacy standards, and I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I don't have it with me right now, but there's a couple of paragraphs up on the front end of that before we break down into the actual like classroom configurations, things like that, that address the safety and security of a building. And so what we've provided to the charter schools is in their leases, we think that they should provide that language as part of their lease when they go talking to a lessor to be able to say, we want to meet these standards. And it's down to, meeting requirements from the DEQ standards, those sort of things, your local ordinances, codes, your fire codes, things like that in that front end language. And so again, we provided that to the charter schools and to their advocates. So.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, can I follow up on that?
Yes, Mr. Co-Chairman. Yeah, go ahead, Senator Rothfuss, and then back over to the chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We provided as sort of an optional guidance, this is a good idea, but it seems like that's insufficient. And I don't know if we need statutory authority to go beyond that, but the state should not be paying for leases for facilities that are inadequate. And we should not be allowing public school students to be educated in schools that we deem inadequate just because a charter school has decided that seems like a good space. We can't be having our public charter school kids qualified somehow as second-rate students that do not have to be in these top-tier facilities. So is there more that we would need to do to ensure not just that language is looked at, but that language is included and reflected in every contract? And what would that look like to make sure that we're protecting all of those children?
Mr. McComey, that's kind of a
Mr.
loaded question.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I don't know at this point in time. I guess I'd have to work with our AG's office to see if in our lease agreement language that we had that as part of our contract. I think it's probably doable, but I don't want to speak out of turn as a non-attorney, so.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that
Yeah.
follow-up.
Mr. Chair, just a couple of comments. I think to underscore what Senator Rothfuss just pointed out, I really think this is one of the bigger considerations we're going to have in the next couple of years. I, for one, have been supportive of alternative schools and charter schools and the opportunity for school choice. But I said on the floor of the Senate this last session, I said, take out your checkbook, because if we're going to do this, we've got to do it right. I remember about 5 or 6 years ago, Senator Rothfuss and I took a bill that was proposed by the then president, used to be a speaker as well, on a school right over here, just down the road. And we spent well into the night, I think 2 or 3 nights, Senator Rothfuss, trying to figure out a way that we could assure that those students were going to be taken care of. You can't just set up an alternative school and then send those kids into an environment that doesn't meet the expectations that we have for every other public school in the state. That was a very difficult lift, and proud of that work, Senator. I'm looking at you on the screen. We got that bill to a position that it was able to pass and allowed for a charter school over here behind us. All of that said, that should be done every single school out there. And that's a tough lift for our department. Director, I really appreciate your comments this morning, and I appreciate the work that you're all trying to do to navigate what I think is going to be a big hill to climb going forward.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if I could, a couple of things, thoughts along that line. Pulling up the rules, it's under the adequacy standards, it's section 3, and it states safety and education environment. And it says the school building shall be in compliance with federal, state, and local building and fire codes and laws that are applicable to the particular building. Code compliance includes the completion of the system improvements or site improvements that are mandated in writing and by the authorities having jurisdiction for the continued use of the school building or facilities. School buildings shall comply with all lawful environmental regulations promulgated by the Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality, the Wyoming Environmental Quality Council, the Federal Environmental Protection Agency, and any and other governmental entities with the jurisdiction over the building. An existing school building may be deemed adequate with respect to the provision if it complies with the international existing building code. So that was the section that we've been having the discussions with the districts. And again, this is in the overall adequacy standards for the department. Getting back to the thoughts on how do we make those schools adequate or assure they're adequate, comparable to what we have with our educational buildings. That's actually a topic that I want to talk about in a little more detail under bullet point number 4, because there's a lot. There's a lot of nuances to that. And for example, we have one charter school that is in a building that and I don't know, I can't remember exact number. I'm going to say it'll hold 240 students. They've got like 40 students. They don't think that building's big enough. So they're saying for their 40, 50 students, they need a bigger building than what we would at the state level said would hold 3 to 4 times that many students. We have some existing charter schools that when in a district, a building was coming up, we said, well, this building may be coming up for something for you to move into. And they said, we don't feel that building's adequate compared to the ones we have as far as how we're educating our students. So what I'm hearing and seeing from the charter schools for the most part is they're certainly wanting to meet at least what we have or maybe even exceed what we have for our requirements for our own district building. So I don't personally see, and in our discussions with their owners or their building principals, those sort of things, where they're certainly not going to try and provide something that is adequate there's always outliers in the world and difference of opinions. There's difference of opinions within the districts as to what is an adequate building or not in the buildings we currently have under the adequacy standards. That's why we're required every 4 years to come in and readdress our adequacy standards. But that's going to be a struggle, I think, and a lot of hard work and effort to try and make that shoe fit on all feet.
Follow up.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Director, I really appreciate those thoughts. I think you hit the big nail on the head. It's going to be a big lift. And I guess my question to you is, have you thus far run into a situation or two that may require statutory changes versus rules? Because what we're doing at the legislative level is passing along this school choice movement, and it falls down on the department to assure these buildings out across, some of which don't even exist, or you pointed out are not adequate to what somebody may want. Thus far, have you run into the need for us to revisit at this level versus trying to handle some pretty complicated issues at the rules level?
Mr. Chairman, we have, and I'll talk about that in a little bit later. It's just a clarification. I think what we currently have in statute works, but when we look at it, we question really, is it clear in what the meaning of the statute is? And we've had that same question from the charter schools. How are you determining what is the square footage that you will pay for on the lease? And we'll get to that a little bit later. Under the charter school lease statute reference, so this is 21-3-110, duties of the boards of trustees. This was effective July 1st of 2023. There is a sentence within that says the lease agreement shall require the lessor to adequately maintain the buildings and facilities in accordance with the standards described by the commission, our commission. So there's language in there, but again, that's pretty broad. And so I think as we move forward, and I'm going to say over the next few years in this discussion, not only with this committee, but perhaps education committee, how do we tie all these things together so that they are clear? You're not having to run from over here to this statute to over here to where it's workable, because that's really what we struggled with. And I think we've come to answers on this with WDE and your LSO staff, but we were unclear. And again, we're the ones that work this quite often. WDE had the language that I talked about earlier in their requirement for a charter school to come in and ask, where they were saying, well, department, you shall assess these buildings, and we don't have the authority in some cases and in other cases. So I think it's really going to take a lot of hard work on this committee, probably education committee, our commission and department, WDE, to again work with this. And we've had a lot of discussions. I see some of the charter school folks here. We've had discussions with the charter schools, and we've got a good working relationship with them right now, and trying to close some of these holes and provide better information. And so it's a work in progress, but I think we're refining it all the time.
Okay. Let's go ahead and move on.
Okay. The next one, and again, this is something that we thought might have been an oversight when the law was changed last year to go from the 4-year requirement, where we started paying on their 4th year because of the verbiage in this. And so this is on page 2, then it's the second bullet point, the dot. So it's Wyoming statute 21-3-314A IV. And what it stated is in there: for any charter school in its 4th subsequent year of this charter school's operation, the charter schools shall expand its enrollment to include 1 or more consecutive grades. So this says in the 4th year. And if you recall, if I go back, we were operating under this 4th year thing. And so we reached out to WDE to try to get clarification, because we've got a charter school, the new one in Cheyenne. Again, we don't know what their numbers were to kind of move forward. So we came and got additional funding based on discussions we had at the 11th hour when the statute was changing last year. So they make their request to WDE and say, we anticipate we're going to have X number of students, and that is in the March timeframe. So we took those numbers and put them in our calculator for what we think they're going to have their lease and those sort of things. Well, then they came back and said, well, we've decided what we're going to do is we're going to go from a K4 to a K5 this year. So they amended those numbers in April, which is fine. We can adjust to that. But then they said, next year we plan to go to a K6. In the subsequent years, we're going to move up. And we're going, well, this says in the 4th subsequent year in that statute, and we're going like, well, can we adjust your numbers when you go up to reflect your needed space based on how we calculate square footage, based on grade configuration, number of students, and all that kind of stuff? And so we didn't think we could. So we're reaching out, trying to figure out how we're going to work around this. Had quite a bit of internal discussions with the charter schools and trying to figure out how this was going to work. Got a hold of WDE, and it's covered. So we don't need a change here. What this is really referring to in this statute is the fact that the first year of operations, what WDE told us is the first year, the second year, and the third year. They actually, if a charter school has a change in the number of students, they adjust it that year. It's not backward looking like it is once they have 3 years under their belt. And then we're looking for, I think, both the block grant and our ADM calculations that come through WDE. It's always backward looking. You take that 3-year average moving forward. Well, in the first 3 years, they automatically, and we didn't know this because we didn't ever have to deal with them on it, because we weren't starting up before until the 4th year. They automatically update that. And if they ask for another grade configuration, they automatically. So when we get our number now from WDE, it's covered. But what it did bring out again is, I think, clarification as we all move through this, that how does that work in the future? So then once they get into the 4th year, if they do have an enrollment, we won't take that into account, or WDE won't take that into account, an enrollment increase, because we're backwards looking 1 year, just like with the major maintenance calculations that we'll talk about later today. When we're backwards looking, it'll be the next year unless they do a grade reconfiguration, and those grade reconfiguration requests come through the department and WDE for approval prior to those happening. And so when that happens, we're involved in that. But then they said with this grade reconfiguration, they will make that adjustment automatically for that year rather than the backwards looking thing. And so again, that was something new that we hadn't run into. Visited with your staff and WDE on it, got the clarification. So one of the things we were asking for there was some clarification in that, and perhaps that needed to be reviewed as part of the previous statute change. It doesn't need to happen. So that kind of note in the bottom of this, we don't need to have because we've got clarification. We can work with what they're doing now to make those adjustments for the lease agreements. So if there's no questions on that, Mr. Chairman, we can move on to the next item also.
Not seeing any right now. Go ahead.
Okay. The next item is item number 3. It's on the next page, 3rd page, and that's Wyoming Statute 21-3-110 AXB. And that states any payment made by the department pursuant to this paragraph for leased buildings or facilities shall not exceed the average cost per square foot for a leased building or facilities comparable to those appropriated for public K-12 education, multiplied by the total square foot leased by the district or charter school necessary for the delivery of the educational program. So rhetorically, I'll ask you, what does that mean? We've been operating under the fact that really what it boils down to is the primary thing here is the necessary to deliver the required educational program. So when we calculate how we fund major maintenance in all of our other school districts, that's the necessary to deliver the educational program. So we look at the configuration of the school. Is it a K4, a K6? Is it a K8, 12, whatever? It changes how we do our calculations. It looks at the average daily attendance, the number we get from WDE. That all falls under that, and that's how that is calculated. And in fact, that's how we've calculated the square footage for leased buildings prior to this. But we've got some new folks coming in and they're saying, well, what's this multiplied by the total square foot or the necessary to deliver? And the less what we do is we pay on the lesser of the two. Again, had a pretty robust discussion with your LSO staff, so they might want to weigh in on this discussion also. And what I think is, just for clarity, I think there could be a statute change here and we have that says any payment made by the department pursuant to this paragraph for a building or facility leased by the district or charter school shall be the lesser of. Because again, when you kind of look up here, you know, kind of where does that lesser of kind of come into that whole discussion? And so it's the lesser of the actual square footage of the facility to be leased. Because we do have some school leases, some buildings and charter schools right now where they're leasing a bigger building than what we're paying for their square foot lease based on the number of students that they have in that building, just like we would the discussion we just had earlier this morning. Exactly that same discussion. Okay, so we're paying the lesser of that or the allowable square footage necessary to deliver the required educational program. I think that clarifies it for us when we're talking with the districts or the charter schools, and it makes it easier for the new charter schools coming in. Again, right now we're kind of sitting at this 7 or 8 charter schools, one more coming online potentially, but in 28, there could be a whole bunch of these things open up, and we're going to be getting those questions. How's all this work? We can have that discussion, but I think this would be, in my opinion, some clarifying language. And again, I'd certainly ask your LSO staff to weigh in on that also, because they're the ones that are familiar with writing this type of legislation. But
Okay, anybody else? Okay,
okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
good there.
Item number 4. So this one is again the examples that I was going to talk about earlier, and I'll ask Laura to probably weigh in on some of these because she really is working daily with the districts on it. But this one comes down to, I'm going to use the term the black hat, okay, for me, and this is why I kind of am struggling with this, and that's if there is a building available in the district, then the charter school, we're required by statute to go out and see if there's a building available. And if it's available, is it adequate and available? And if so, then a charter school moves in. So we have a number of charter schools that already have leases. I don't know what their leases are. I can tell you, we have that data, but off the top of my head, which one's which? Some of them have short-term leases. They've told me their lease is as short as 6 months and the district can kick them out of the building, that they're in an existing school building right now. On the side where they're building them, we're hearing and seeing that it's 20-25 year leases. So again, going back to, you're a business, you're trying to start a charter school, you work with somebody to build a building, and earlier discussion, we want it to be at least adequate and meeting all those things that we have in our buildings, and that's not cheap. And maybe you lease a building, and we're seeing this right now where they're adding on to buildings and they're improving those leased buildings. with their charter school funds, not funds coming through us. And so you have this lease, and now a building becomes available in a district somewhere. And I am required to go over and say, you either need to move over there, or we're not going to pay you a lease. And statute gives me that authority to do that, but frankly, I struggle to do that, to go in and say, you got to break your lease. And now for a few reasons. So what if it's available that year? What if the district needs it the next year? Again, we have a charter school in a leased building right now that through the district, that the district's saying, my out clause is only 6 months notice and you got to go somewhere else. They say they have a great relationship with that superintendent and they don't expect any issues, but you never know. What if a scenario, and let's take Laramie 1 Cheyenne right now, and we've got a couple, 3 charters there, and a building opens up in Laramie. So I go to the first charter school and say, there's a building available, first of the 3 that are in town, and you need to move over there. And they say, no, we don't want to move over there. So I say, okay, I'm not going to pay your lease. So I go to the charter school number 2 and I say, you need to move over there. They say, no, I don't want to move over there. So I'm not going to pay your lease. Then you go to the third one and said, yeah, we'll take that school, but that's the only school available. We'll move over there. Does that mean I don't actually pay the other 2 because they turned down the first offers? I don't know. There was only 1 school available, but we got 3 schools there. So I think these are some of the issues that I, as director, the department is struggling with on thou shall move into that school. And I understand where that all came from. I was here when that was discussed. It saves the state money if there's a school building available, all those sort of things. Okay, I understand all that. On the other end of that, we have the potential to have, and again, maybe there's 2 schools come available in there, so the 1. But as this opens up across the districts, one of the things we're wondering, one of the things that we're tasked with, the commission is tasked with, is in the best financial interest of the state, we are the ones that approve a district to dispose of a building. So now the question comes up, forward looking, there may or there may not be more buildings, charter schools start up in 28. Right now, as I mentioned this morning, we've had a number of disposal of buildings around the state by the districts. Should the commission be looking ahead and saying, you know, maybe we shouldn't allow you to dispose of that building because there might be a future charter school come up in your area? But at the meantime, the state then is on the hook for the major maintenance and those sort of things for that building and paying for that. And what if it happens? Great. Maybe it's money ahead. If it doesn't happen, is that money ahead? Or should we just continue on and take it right now? There isn't a charter school in that area. So we just say, okay, dispose of the building or not. I don't know. That's another scenario I think that, you know, needs to be discussed when we're dealing with charter schools in the future. I'm going to ask Laura to kind of weigh in on some of the other discussions she's had with charter schools on some of these scenarios that we've been kicking around also. So.
Before we do that,
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, before we do that, I just want to back up and flip the coin a little bit. You know, districts are under a lot of pressure now. I mean, this is a big movement. It's something that the legislature, for all intents and purposes, has underlined and sanctioned and trumpeted in some cases, these alternative sorts of schools and charters. But in defense of the districts, you know, we just got done talking this morning about major maintenance funding and these facilities that are past the square footage allowed. They try to mothball a school and get out from underneath, you know, being penalized for having too much square footage, and then enrolls one of these schools and the pressure to approve. So they do. And then back we go to more square footage than is allowed. How does that work, Director? What let's just use as an example, and I don't mean to pick on anyone, but you drive by it as you go through Riverton. We just tore down a big building there. What if they turn around and now approve a charter school? I guess there's just so much in my mind I'm trying to work through, not only from the charter school perspective, but for the district's perspective. I don't know how that works. Are we to allow districts more square footage than we are allowing now, just in case a charter school comes along? I guess that's the consideration. Do I read you correctly on that?
Director?
Well, Mr. Chairman, at this point in time, I don't know if that's the directive, but that's something internally, that's a question we had.
And I'm sorry to ramble, by the way. There's a lot of considerations
Yeah.
here.
There is. And again, if you tell a district, no, we won't allow you to dispose of it, then where are we at on the hook for the major maintenance? Because they can garner up to 10% of their major maintenance funds to maintain that school and keep it going. But you have, beyond just the major maintenance, they're paying, gas, electric, all those sort of things, out of their block grant on that also. If we say, no, you can't dispose of that. I mean, that's really what I'm seeing on the major maintenance side. There is an emphasis still, even if we're paying this percentage or we up that percentage. I think there's still an emphasis for the districts to get rid of some of these schools simply because it affects their block grant funding side of the house. And so I'm just throwing out scenarios that we're kicking around as we come up with a program and we, the state, want to take a look at what that looks like. Do we do that?
Oh.
Do we look at those? Because again, we've disposed of a bunch of buildings just this year. And in the district's plans, they're coming to us saying, yeah, we're probably going to move kids here. We're going to probably in the next few years get rid of this building or whatever. And in some cases, they close down schools, take them out, but they have the intent of using that building for another purpose later on. So the argument becomes, is there a greater purpose for that than a charter school? If they want to use it for an administration building or a warehouse for themselves, rather than dispose of it, does the charter school trump that? I'm being asked that right now.
Well, and Mr. Chairman, it might be in the master plan of that particular district that building is to go because they're past square footage allowed. And the state doesn't compensate them for taking care of that building. So they have it on the list to get rid of that building. We just talked about the need to mothball and get rid of things. Well, and then along comes a charter school, the pressure to approve, and then they've got to stand that all the way back up again. And somehow, some way, that expense comes back to us, right? Because those buildings in some cases aren't up to speed. There's a reason why they're being mothballed. So anyway, yeah, appreciate you.
I would echo that exact sentiment because I think that's where all the nuances is. And going back and thinking about this discussion as it changed in, I don't remember us actually adding the available, right? That was not changed. What was made available or what we changed in there was shall make available to a charter school or something along those lines. It wasn't that, so the legislation was in there, but the ability for us to legislate nuances that you have described, I think is almost indescribable. I think that does come down to the facility plan and actually having a discussion offline. This, I think, even goes deeper into the square footage discussion during that time frame of what's good square footage, what's bad square footage, and coming to an agreement there. And do we have extra square footage that we don't need to take care of, and we need to, well, if it's in a school building and it's kids classrooms, it's going to be the way that it goes. So,
well, an interesting discussion. So this is a scenario I'm dealing with right now. Okay, we have a charter school that again has a limited number of students, and they're saying, okay, we're in a school facility building right now, but we don't think it's even adequately sized right, even though the way we would calculate it for our schools is 3 to 4 times more students can be in that building. So they've then gone out and looked at a second building within that district. And part of it was their current building doesn't have a kitchen in it. So they've been bringing in lunches for all of their students. Their meals have been coming in. There's another building available that is old offline, and but it has a kitchen. So they want to get that building and use the kitchen facilities. And they also want to make some changes within the building and do a couple of, I believe it's CTE type of programs within that building. So we went and looked at the building, and the building is not adequate, and condition wise, it is not good. It was one that's been sitting there, and we said, no. They said, well, we're going to buy it anyway. And they did. So I mean, I can tell every charter school is unique on how they're running their programs and what their setup is and where they're located, around the state. And so within that, again, because that second school, they're above, they have more square footage than what we calculate. We're not going to make them a payment for it, but they went in and said, well, we're going to use this other, which they have the prerogative to do, that says we can't stop them because they want to be able to utilize that kitchen. And then again, some CTE space within that other building. Okay. But if that was their primary school, we would say, no, we wouldn't allow you to go into there and make it, it's not adequate building.
So, yeah, Senator Office, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One other nuance, and I appreciate this discussion. This is at the core of the concerns that we've had with charter school facilities since the beginning, and this is the best discussion we've had of them as we're starting to see it in practice. We understand it's incredibly complicated, and I don't know what the answers are. I wish there were a magic way to solve all of Dell's questions, but I certainly don't see it. And I do think that we need to provide some tweaks to language and some changes to address the available and adequate aspects to some degree to give Dell the needs that he has. But one other area, and I know this is another one that we're dealing with, is if you have an available school that is a school with a capacity of 300, for example, and you have a charter school looking at it that only has 100 students, and you have to basically light up the entire 300 person school to make it functional for that 100, there's another case where you could certainly call that available and adequate space, but it's not cost effective. And that's not part of what we provide either anywhere is the thoughtful consideration of, all right, it's available, it's adequate, but it still makes bad sense from a financial standpoint. I don't think that flexibility is very clearly provided. And I'd ask Dell if that's another area. I don't think it's addressed in the memo, but I feel like we need to make sure that that's being contemplated as well. Do you have any ideas or thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, no, I hadn't. I mean, we've looked at that, just as just in these overall discussions, but that funding comes out for the districts that would come out of the block grant side of, maintaining those utilities or whatever in a school building. And I'm not, so I don't get into that. I don't deal with that. So I don't know what that looks like. There's probably some district folks could tell you that are hopefully here, but I don't deal with that on that end because there's a nuance on how we provide funding for major maintenance on those school buildings versus a charter lease. There's a difference in that lease agreement and what that looks like. And again, Laura could go into more detail because she deals with that, but one of them says on the lease from a private end that lessor must part of the lease agreement is he takes care of those major components. If the air conditioning goes, that's his responsibility or that's all outlined. We're not making any payments on that. Where on the district side, we still do that calculation on major maintenance dollars and that pass through and that goes to the district. Then the charter school has to request that funding through the district for that major maintenance work. So there's even nuances between those two sides on where that ends up.
Okay, anybody else? Yes, Representative Stork?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wondered if you could generalize about the size of classrooms in the charter schools that we have in any way. I'm just trying to understand kind of how it compares to our districts. And I know our districts vary a lot, but I'm just kind of wondering where they land on the spectrum.
Well, in some cases, the charter schools are in leased built, or they're in school district buildings, so they're matching up fairly well. We actually asked the charter schools to give us their floor plans, so we have their floor plans for their buildings, know what grade configuration they have, and then how many students they have in those areas. So that is similar. As far as room sizes, I personally haven't ever looked at that. Our planning staff looks at that to try and size those, because that does enter into our calculations for we treat them just the same as a district building. So if you look at how we calculate the square footage in a building and the number of students, if you have your kindergartners, we give them 50 square foot per student. And by statute, I think it's at 16. You have in the high school, it's 40 square foot and 25 students. So you do that multiplication out. So you should have a room that's that size, 800 square foot, whatever that number comes out to be. If you have a room that's 1,000 square foot, we don't penalize the districts. We just say, okay, that's the right size, and it will hold 16 students, not that it'll hold 22 students for calculation. We use restricted capacity, and we size that at 16. But if that room was at 500 and it only held 12 students, we would only calculate that square footage for 12 students in there. And if they had 20 kindergartners, then they got to have a second room for that calculation to take care of those from a square footage. So we're treating the calculations for the charter schools the same as we do internally. Size of the rooms, I couldn't tell you. They truly vary, just like they do across the state for ours. So.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Vice Chairman.
Well, I would just say again, Director, thank you. This is a really important discussion, and it's going to be ongoing. I think a lot of it is falling on your department in working with the districts out there. But I would say again, we stand ready to jump in when needed and if needed. Honestly, we've got a management council member on screen here. I'm not so sure that this shouldn't be taken up in a more robust way. And, I appreciate the commission, and the work they're doing with you. I just feel like we don't really have this right yet, committee. And it's going to impact our budgets and our considerations going forward. So we've been made aware of it for sure. Anyway, Director, keep it in mind. And if it looks like this is going to require more of a task force type look, we should consider that. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that would certainly be my recommendation, because again, just the change last year alone, we were working with your LSO staff, we were working with WDE, and there really didn't necessarily need to be any changes, but we were just trying to figure out what happened. And we're getting questions from the charter schools. And I think uniformity with the charter schools starting up in the future and how we treat them, and some predictability. Again, I'm very concerned, and so I don't want to diminish this on my role in saying a charter school is available and you got to move out, and what's your terms on your lease. Now, I'm not saying that if they have a 25-year lease, the benefit to the state is to keep a 25-year lease. But I think maybe needs to be some time frame to give them a buffer to move in or out or whatever, rather than just be coming in that next year. And you have a business plan, you have a model. The districts, I mean, setting up for a teacher and getting their classrooms going. My daughter's a teacher, is a big lift, and getting the right amount of furniture is a big lift. and suddenly we tell you in the middle of the year or the end of the year that you got to move into a new building, and maybe you're building onto your building you have right now. What do you kill the contracts and so then if the building something happens to that building, they need to move. Who would ever lease another charter school? If I was in private sector, why would I go build another charter school with the program we have when they may be in here leased this week and next week they might not be, and then they may want back. I just am struggling with the business plan part of it. And again, we have folks here that they can testify to that better than me, but the way we calculate it. So, Mr. Chairman, there is one more item number 5. This is the
Chairman,
last
before we
page
go to
on that
that-
discussion.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That last point is again something, and I agree with Senator Landon that we might need to find a way to really dig down on this and solve these problems before they get us wrapped around the axle. The leasing issue is a big issue. We don't provide a substantial amount of guidance on what those leases look like and how many years they can be. So you have a charter school board, which, is its own little entity, not an elected entity, but they're effectively binding the state into a lease agreement. There are conditions on that lease agreement and statute as to how many dollars they are, but I don't think there's anything about the length of that contract. And you can be creating then these 25-year obligations that are effectively obligations back to the state of Wyoming. I don't know what the language looks like to ensure that the state is capable of kicking out. That's something I'd ask Dell if we're reviewing those and if we're getting involved in ensuring that we have adequate protections as a state so that if something goes sideways, we're not on the hook for a 25-year lease obligation for a charter school that might not exist 5 years from now after its first review period. But we don't have a handle on any of this, right? It's all very much flying as we go. And when you have an agreement between a charter school and the district, then I think we have some expectation that the district is doing its due diligence through their elected board of trustees, but we don't necessarily have that in the same way now with our state approved and authorized. So we could, but I don't know that we are. So I think there's a lot for us to be concerned about on both sides. And the other side, as Dell mentioned, the idea of kicking out a charter school 6 months later because a school district wants to use some of the space. So now we have to move 100 students to a new school. And oh, by the way, it's up to them to figure out where that is also an abuse to our public school kids. We don't want to see that. We want to make sure that there's continuity and that we're not just moving our kids around because they're at the whim of a school district that might not have authorized them and might not be happy with that charter school. So there's no easy answer here. This is exactly the nightmare challenge that I think we anticipated, but maybe didn't see the bottom of when we started to go down this path. Do we have any ability to affect those contracts, Dell, and ensure that we're not signing away the state's interests for 25 years, or do we just go with whatever they go with?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to have Laura answer that. And yes, we do have a way to affect those. So,
Laura, please.
Mr. Chairman, back in the day, when this all first started, this is before my time with the department, we used to be considered a third party on the lease with the charter school. That happened for a while. And then per the Attorney General's edict, we moved away from that. So we're not a third party on the lease between the leaseor and the leasee. That's not our role. We're not part of that. We do, however, put together a funding agreement, which is an agreement between the state and the charter school outlining the terms of how much money they will get and the payments that they will get and the size of the building and the terms of them getting the funding. One of which is we only do a funding agreement for a 2-year period because that's our biennial budget. That's all I have to go with. We also have to put a section into the funding agreement that explains that to the charter school saying, we're dependent on the funding. So if we don't get funding from the legislature, we can't fulfill this. It's just it's a standard part of the contract. So in that way, we do affect it so that they know if they're signing a 25-year lease agreement, there's an expectation, I'm sure, that the state will continue to pay lease payments, but I have no control over what those are beyond the biennium that I know that I have money for. Does that help answer the question?
Mr. Chairman, follow up. I think it helps. it helps to some degree, but the question is if they sign that 25-year agreement, even though you've got a 2-year funding agreement, and they obligate based on those signatures, presumably the state of Wyoming, to a 25-year lease agreement, what happens next when 5 years in at the review, we decide that school is not performing, it ends up losing its charter? I have no idea what the state's legal standing is in that, if they've signed, again, on behalf of the state, a lease agreement for 25 years and then only honored it for 5 of those years. So while you're informing them that, hey, you shouldn't do that, I don't see anything stopping them from doing it anyway. And I can imagine for the developers that do the development of charter schools on those 25-year lease agreements and do that as a commercially viable approach to development, they're going to write some pretty rigid contracts to ensure that they can't lose their investment. So do we actually have any capacity to be protecting the state on that? Or are we, the state, if the charter school goes away, going to be on the hook for that lease?
Laura?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not an attorney, so I couldn't speak to what that legal implication is. My understanding of it and working with the Attorney General's office is that is in moving towards those funding agreements, that would be the protection the state has, as we inform them that we only have the money in the agreement is only for a 2-year period. The charter school is an independent entity and they can independently sign a lease with whomever they would like for whatever terms they would like. We have no control over that whatsoever.
And Mr. Chairman, we're not signatory to that either.
No.
That lease agreement, we're not involved in that. That's between the charter school and the lessor, so.
Additionally, just as a notation, one of the things, and this has all come about, we've had, prior to recently, we've only had 3 charter schools that we pay leases for. And so we've had some different things that have gone on through the years to try and refine the process. One of the things in looking at this, now that we've got a couple more charter schools that are coming on board and the 3-year requirement has been repealed, is we're looking at the possibility of changing kind of the format and how we've done it. Previously, because we budget on a biennium basis for a 2-year period, we look at what their enrollment is and we use the October 1st enrollment from WDE that they scrub the data and they get it to us. We use that information to say, here's the number of students you have. We plug it into our allowable square foot calculator. Here's the allowable square footage. And then we have a whole calculation that we progress through, but then we request money for a 2-year period. As things are changing and as we anticipate the changes that are going to come online when we have in 28, when there could be basically an open floodgate of charter schools for all we know, we want to make sure that we're nailing down that process and looking forward to try and make sure that we're making accommodations. So one of the things that we'd like to move toward is doing a supplemental, just like we would do for major maintenance, where we ask for the biennial request, and then partway through the year, we go through and we reevaluate based on the CRV values or something like that, where we go through and we say, oh, it looks like we're going to be short. We're going to need this much more. We'd like to do that additionally with charter schools, where for the supplemental budget, we get the new enrollments from the latest WDE October 1st enrollment, and then go through and recalculate and compare, do we need a supplemental budget or not? And that would be a change for this committee. You may see supplemental budgets for us on charter schools when in the past you have not, but we feel like that's fair. And another thing that does for us is we'd like to move to quarterly payments. Before it had been a lump sum, and we don't actually pay the charter schools. The district pays this to a charter school, and that's in statute that we have to pay a district. The district then pays a charter school. So we usually get a request for payment once a year from them, and we make a yearly payment. They have to request the payment from us, the district does. So what we'd like to do is move towards a quarterly payment. And what that allows us to do is, if we're paying on a quarterly basis, and let's say we make the first and second quarter payments based on what we think the enrollment's going to be, and then something happens and the enrollment didn't materialize, or they actually have less than we thought, then we're going to do a true up on those second 2 payments. So we may be paying more if they had more, or we may be prorating those payments so that it's a true up. So in the end, they get exactly what they're supposed to, but that way we're not doing big lump sum payments. And then it's pretty hard to go back to somebody once you've written them a check and say, oh, hey, could I have a little bit of that back? We don't want to be doing that or putting the charter schools in that position, and we don't want to be put in that position to ask for that back. So we'd like to move to a quarterly payment. That's another change that we're working through and trying to get into the funding agreement. We're actually a little behind the gate. Usually I have funding agreements in place and out to the charter schools by May, and I'm still working on all the refinements because every time we turn around on the charter school, there seems to be another question that comes up or a situation that comes up that makes us go, how are we going to address that? And we're trying to make sure that we're being as fair and clear to the charter schools because we want them to have information so they can proceed on their business model and go on their happy way and know what to expect from us. But we're also trying to be fair to the state because our fiduciary responsibility is to the state as well.
So, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Vice Chairman.
So, thank you, Laura, for that. The quarterly payment piece, is that a bill draft that you are requesting? Is that something you can accomplish through rule or?
No, actually, what we'll do is we'll put that into the funding agreement. So that the districts, in addition to knowing what their overall payment is, it will state that we are going to pay quarterly and that, all of those things are coming up. So as we had the funding agreement fairly well in place, and through the AG's office, we thought we were going to go through it and be able to get those out the door. And then we started having all of these other conversations around charter schools in preparation for this meeting. And they just brought up so many other questions that we've drawn that back again so that we can make those changes and include them in the charter schools. So in the funding agreement with them. So when we lay that out, they know exactly what to expect from us, and we know what our obligations are and they know what their responsibilities are. For instance, they need to get us all of their square footage. That's something else that I struggle with. So if they're in an older school building, like we have a couple charter schools in Cheyenne that are in old school buildings, we have all that information in our database. I know the size of those buildings. I know what the square footage is. So they may not be leasing all of that, but I know what the square footage of the building is, and then I can look at the lease that they provide me so I know what we're getting. In a new building, I have nothing. I have nothing to go on. I'm wholly dependent on the charter school providing that information to me and assuming that it's accurate. We want to make sure we're putting that into the funding agreement too, that they know it's an obligation. And if they make an addition, so let's say they lease a 10,000 square foot building and they're only using 5,000 square foot. So maybe over the next 3 years, they plan to do additions on that. If they're doing those additions, I need to have proof that they have occupancy of that space. So that is now included in their space. I need to have drawings and I need to have square footages so I know how much square feet they're actually utilizing so I can adjust payments accordingly. And I need to have all of that in the funding agreement as well. So they know what their obligation to me is. So then I can fulfill my obligation of getting the square footage and the payment that they're entitled to. It's been quite a quagmire, I have to admit. Every time we turn around, we think we've got it nailed down, and then something else comes up that makes us really stop and think. And we want to be as proactive as possible.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, please, kudos to Laura and her group. They've been working hard with the charter schools themselves, reaching out. My understanding is the charter schools do like kind of the mirror of the major maintenance quarterly funding type thing and truing that up over time. And then us being able to come in and say whether we need more money, because in all these discussions we've been having, we found out one of the charter schools is adding some square footage. And they actually have, by the calculation, they have enough student population that when they add that, it will be available. I mean, we'll be paying for it. Well, they're doing that right now and it's going to come online, and we didn't ask for any funding. We didn't know anything. So we're actually bringing the charter schools in, and we're going to have our annual meetings with them, just like we do the schools, and have those discussions that are nuances to the charter schools. Again, we've had an awful lot of meetings this summer. And well, actually after legislation last year with the charter schools and their groups. And so I think we're making some really good refinements, and some of the things I talked about earlier, clarifications that both they've brought to our attention and things that we feel probably ought to be at the attention of the legislature. So.
All I can say, I guess, at this point is I appreciate the work you guys are doing. I've also been in contact with the charter schools as well. Again, I will reiterate this right here, these discussions, these issues, that once you think you've solved it, that worm, that snake pops its head up somewhere else, and we've got something else to worry about, This is exactly why we needed to have a rein in on some of this before 2028 when we open this up and this is not rocket science, right? I also take the other side of this, that other states have figured this out. Other states have gone through this and they've been able to figure this out, but also other states have a very unique funding model for their education system compared to ours. So appreciate the work you guys are doing. I know you guys have much rather be running your head into a brick wall some days. So really appreciate you guys and the work that you guys are doing to solve this. Senator Hicks.
So, Mr. Chairman, Dale, just to back up, I thought I understood that you guys had some proposed recommendations on potential, just as a modification of the language to the existing statute 21.3.110A. And it was just for clarity that SCD recommends to propose revisions to that statute. So, Mr. Chairman, the question is do we want to go ahead and have LSO go ahead and draft up that legislation to just provide that clarity that SBC has requested? It would be an.
I think so.
Committee, anybody else have any thoughts on that? I don't see any reason why not.
Well, it's getting back to the whole issue of this is going to be something we're going to eat little pieces at a time.
Yep.
This is one of the little pieces that we can eat right now. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would move that we direct LSO to draft that bill up for our next meeting that was requested by SBC on 21.3-101.
Okay, and since that was a motion, I'll need a second.
Second.
Seconded by Landon. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the bill draft to be presented at our next meeting, go ahead and signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed? Oh, I forget we have you guys out there in digital world. All those opposed, no? All right. That bill.
Mr. Chairman, I think the reference was made 101, but I'm sure that Tanya
110.
picked up on 110. Yeah, thing. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, there's one final thing, and this is all in our side of the house. And again, this is on the last page of that discussion on charter schools, chapter 3, section 11 of the adequacy standards. You'll probably see us coming out with an emergency rule while we then work through the rulemaking process. And so what happened is under the last set of rules, the charter schools were placed in the same header as alternative schools. And that kind of messes up how we do calculations, or could mess up how we do calculations on their square footage. And so we want to use the same stuff we do for the regular schools, using the general district K-12 configuration and associated utilization rates for these charter schools. So we need to make some amendments to our own rules to be able to do that. And so again, we'll be probably coming out with some emergency rules. And again, we report to the committee on any rulemaking in that process. So.
And I would just say, as you guys are going through that, one of the things that we struggled with the last time through was getting adequate time to review those rules on our side of things. So just please make sure that as you guys get those drafted, get those rolling through, not only do you get them to staff quickly, but that way they can get them to us right away as we can review as well.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. And for me, it's a little bit of a timing issue where I think we're good at where we're at today in funding and moving forward. So I want to probably do the emergency rules as late as I can, because we are required every 4 years to do the adequacy standards. So, and that's part of the rulemaking process. We'll have to come out and make those changes. So if I can do an emergency rule that would give me then time to incorporate that into the regular rulemaking process, I won't have to come out with a set of rules and then come out with another set of rules a little bit later, but we'll see how that all works out.
As one who used to draft rules for doing the state, I completely understand why you would want to do that all at once. So.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Dell, it looks like that takes us into number 5. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So one of the things that we were asked to provide at this meeting was an accounting of where schools are at as far as in the condition assessment, and those schools that moved more than 10 places from the 2016 through the 2023 assessment, and perhaps why were they addressed and are those things being addressed now? So as far as verifying, why did they move, those sort of things. So within this information we provided, I'll just kind of start down through the chains to the top. So first, and I think the committee's heard this before, there was a methodology change from the 2016 to the 2023. The 2016 was also based on a stated depreciation of the buildings, i.e. a new building versus a 50-year-old building. When they looked at that scoring, it was a snapshot in time. In 23, the FCI, the depreciation of the building was not used, and it's more of a direct what they found as far as what the current condition of the building was and the components of that building. And it looks at what is anticipated in the future for remaining service life of those components. One of the other things that came about is in 2016, the review was only of the building. The 2023 was not only the building, but the site and those things on the site. So say athletic fields, their athletic components, the bleachers, whatever it may be, the roadway, the lighting, those sort of things out there. So two really different thoughts on how that 16 versus 23, how we not assess buildings, but how we look at buildings and what we look at with those buildings. When you look at the numbers, when we say, okay, in the schools that moved more than 10 spots from their FCI scores, and again, this is on the next page, there's in 2016 to 2023, 370 of the 388 buildings moved 10 spots or more. But interestingly enough, under the current Veritas system, where we're forward looking at components that are coming up in the future, the difference between 2023 Veritas and 2024 Veritas, 299 of the 393 buildings are going to move, or have moved, because we're in 24, have moved 10 or more spots. And so I had a handout for your LSO staff, and I apologize for those that might be online, but this actually was discussed at the last meeting. So if you remember the graph that went up and it had the lines and it showed the different years, and there was a dark line for the amount of work to be accomplished moving forward in the future. When you look at that, we are now assessing that work coming up in the future. That changes that FCI score each year. That was that graph, that line that went up if you add up if they don't do work. Well, at the same time, we're also now taking into account when they do major maintenance work and they go through and will recalculate what their FCI score is based on the individual buildings that the districts are spending major maintenance or component funding on. So that's going to change those scores moving forward in the future. Additionally, in between 2016 and 2023, there was a condition, there was the assessments, there was, now this is expenditures, not money that was available, but on expenditures, there was $1,019 million spent by the districts on their buildings. Of that, $468 million was major maintenance funding that was expended. There was $59 million in component projects that was expended. And there was also $492 million in capital construction. And I believe you have those numbers also broke down. We were asked to give that by district and by that funding. So you should have a list for all 48 districts and what each of those districts spent within that. Obviously, spending $1 billion is going to change the condition of your buildings. And that's going to change where your rankings would be and that movement within those individual districts compared to statewide. One of the other things that we've come across is spending of insurance funds by the districts. Now, we don't account for that within our own accounting system, but that does happen and districts do spend money. So one of the districts that we were visiting with since the Veritas study said, oh, by the way, we had a hailstorm come through after the Veritas study and we had to put a brand new roof on our building. We're now going to capture that as a question we're going to be asking in our annual meeting. So you, the districts, what are you spending money on through insurance, which will adjust your score? We were talking to another district that told us between 2016 and 2023, they had a hailstorm come through and they replaced all the roofs on 5 of their buildings through that single event through insurance money. That obviously adjusted that score. That's why things could change again, affect the overall, why did things move 10 positions? The site features I mentioned earlier in the 2016, that wasn't taken into account. It was in the 2023. Changes to the educational building inventory. I have those kind of highlighted, but there are charts in the back here that actually break that down by building and by area and the years completed for a number of these things that I'm going to talk about. So within that same time frame from 2016 to 2023, there were 28 new buildings. There were 21 renovations. There were 46 component projects. There were 4 buildings that were demolished and 10 were disposed of. Obviously, that's going to change ranking on how things transpired as to where they fit from one of the assessments to the next.
Can I ask a question, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
So, and I wasn't able to attend the meeting, but are we trying to get at is it's just because the ranking shifts, and I think it'd be more interesting to the magnitude of the shift. In other words, if we're just moving and it really doesn't change a lot, and so it's the magnitude that's we're trying to, I think, understand is if why did something substantially change, not why it modestly changed because of a new roof or a component project. And so Dale, is based on the assessment, did you see any of that when you were going through the data? It wasn't explainable. In other words, if we saw something that was previously ranked as number 300 on the list that went to number 40, that's a significant magnitude shift from 2016 or 23, 24.
Mm-hmm.
Just because it shift 10 positions, but it's still in the same order, doesn't really mean that much as far as looking at the data.
Del,
yes.
before you head on,
Okay.
the discussion was actually a little bit different. The discussion as it came to us was, and the reason we asked for this information was there was a belief out there that only a few certain schools had moved, and why were those being indiscriminately challenged? And so to your point, though, I think that you're understanding, yeah. But the discussion really did center around, well, if we had everybody shift, and I don't know how many, I talked to you probably a month and a half ago, and you said, you know, we're sitting there trying to go piece by piece and find out where these guys moved. And you said all but about 10 schools moved more than that entire thing.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that's what we were trying to encapsulate, is that everybody shifted it. And I think, again, we go back to where we were a year and a half ago. We were all just trying to grasp our heads around what this new model looked like. And then once we started getting our understanding of what this model looked like, it was, well, why did this school move from number 1 to number 16? And this school that was, 292 move up to number 16 or 14. And so we were trying to figure that out. But what you're trying to state to us with this is just about everybody moved. There's very few that didn't, and those that didn't, it's just happenstance that they didn't, not much of anything else.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's correct. There is a ranking sheet here towards the back of this that actually gives the ranking in 24, 23, and 16, and kind of shows where things are shifting right now. So you can, peruse through that and see those changes. But yes, everything's changing. And I guess the emphasis that I want to make is that from 23 to 24, 2/3 of the buildings moved 10 spots just based on what we're seeing coming up. And that will continue to happen in the future. And as we then feed back into the loop, those expenditures that are made, that will change that ranking again, even in addition to what we see coming up. I think what the beauty of this system that we're moving towards now is that, and this happened between the 12 and the 16. There was a lot of these same questions happen between the 12 assessment and the 16 assessment. Why did this change? Why did this change? Well, in the current system we have now, annually, we'll be able to show the districts where we believe their building is sitting at this point in time. So it shouldn't come as a giant surprise when we do another assessment 4 years, 5 years out as to where they're at. Will there be some changes? Probably, yes. Things will age. We'll do another assessment. But based on where we're at today and the feedback of what work's being done, it shouldn't be any dramatic ideas of it went from number 300 to number 1 or vice versa. We should be better on top of that. One of the things that we're going to incorporate, so John, when are we having the meeting with the districts, the training on the Veritas? It's coming up next week or week after?
I believe it's August 29th on Thursday.
Yeah,
Is that correct?
we're actually we're rolling this out to the districts. And so we want them to look at their scores, better understand how they can utilize the Veritas data. And then when we have the annual plan, and Mr. Chairman, the department originally was not going to have an annual plan meeting with the districts this year. We're moving that forward and we're changing it to October, November timeframe. Our planning staff has been working with the districts to get that timeframe set up. So what I'd like to do is have the districts look at their data and then come back in that annual plan and let us know, okay, are you comfortable with it? Is there something that's glaring? Let us know, and let's go out and have that discussion on their individual buildings or concerns or whatever. And that's not just to do it at this, as that comes up and they run into this stuff, let us know. We're happy to adjust things, have those discussions with them as we move forward. And I think at the end of the day, with these iterations over the next few years, we'll get to a lot better place in the long term on analyzing what the needs of the buildings are.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
I just wanted to thank you, Director, for doing this work and helping us to get up to speed as well. I know that'll be helpful next week and onward with the districts, but it helps us too. And as we go forward to visit with the other 85, it's helpful that we kind of know a little bit more background too. So really appreciate the effort to go one more stab at this to help us get arms around it. So thank you.
Mr. Chairman, again, we can certainly let the committee know, when our meeting is, the time. It's going to be an electronic format. So, the districts will be coming in. So you all are more than welcome to sit in and see that presentation live, hear the questions from the districts, hear our answers. Hopefully we can answer their questions. If we can't, we'll go back and figure out what it is and get back to them. So again, it's not this is a done deal today, whatever. I want to make it an iterative process. So with that, Mr. Chairman, if there isn't any more questions, I think we've probably answered it the best we can at this point in time.
Senator Hicks, please.
I'm looking at this and I'm just wondering, so when the handout that you have and you looked at the state's funded expenditures between 2016 and 2023, the interesting thing I find of that data is we almost have a 1-to-1 ratio between what our maintenance cost is and our new construction cost. And so over that time period, is there any way that we can find out, is that comparable to some of our surrounding states? What are they spending relative to maintenance versus new construction? Or maybe with your experiences, Director, even with non-school related facilities, but with your time with YDOT, was that a normal ratio of 50% maintenance, 50% new construction? And I don't know. I'm just asking. I think it's an interesting statistics.
Mr. Chairman, I had never looked at it from that viewpoint. No, I don't know. We can reach out to other states. It's a little bit difficult to get that information state by state because we are funded uniquely and we have that information as a state. In a lot of states, it's local control. And so it's all over the board. I attended, there's a National Committee on School Facilities, and I used to attend that annual conference that they have. And so like New York was there. New York has like a staff of 2. that deals with all the schools at the state level, because everything's at the local control. So to get that type of tracking and information, when I tell them what we're doing in Wyoming and how we're funding major maintenance and routine maintenance and the block grants, in many cases, they were astounded that the program that we have and the data that we have to track all of this. And they're going, can you send, I mean, lots of times after a meeting, we were getting all these requests from other states. What are you doing? How do you have it set up? What's your format? I mean, I think that's what.
I don't want you to do a lot of work on
Yeah.
this. And the reason I bring it up is what Senator Landon was talking about earlier. Is there some savings to be made here? So let's assume that we were 70% maintenance. Does that reduce the cost of new construction? And do they offset each other? And so I'm just running through the numbers in my mind, trying to figure out, is there a better way to do business?
Chairman.
Yep.
You
Senator.
know, interesting question by the senator, and I appreciate where you're going with it, because that, you know, that's been on our minds for a long time. One of the pieces that, this is anecdotal, but having been here for quite a long time on this committee, we inherited a statewide system that, quite frankly, we didn't have a lot of money in the 80s and 90s as a state of Wyoming, and a lot of these buildings got quite a long ways behind. And so these last 20 years, a lot of the efforts on the part of the state have been to catch up our fleet of schools. I think we're getting pretty close to at least getting, you know, you take Hobbs and a couple others out of the mix, and pretty soon, you know, our fleet looks a lot better. But I think that's a factor. I think we've maybe had a little bit more of an aggressive new construction program over the 20 years than maybe a normal circumstance if they'd been taken care of. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but that's just my gut feeling on it.
Okay. Committee, anything further? All right, this will allow us to open up the public comment. Thank you. Wow, I am usually not that bad on this. Seeing no questions from the committee on this, opened it up to public comment in regards to everything that we have heard from the commission and well, I guess it's not the commission, the department. So if you have public comment in regards to charter schools, mainly was a big portion of it, but also the re-ranking portion. Ms. Klein, please come forward.
I think this is on. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Carrie Klein. I'm with the Wyoming Public Charter School Association. So wanted to thank you for the opportunity to comment today. First of all, I'd like to start by thanking Director McComey, Ms. Anderson, Ms. Carlson has helped us, Mr. Rexis. They've been fantastic to work with, and I really do want to express my appreciation for the meetings we've had, and really look forward to their willingness to continue to work with us in the schools on these issues that we're identifying to find solutions. As you heard already, there are several areas where we're starting to see challenges with regards to facility statutes and public charter schools. This might be the understatement of the day, and I do apologize. I did leave both my crystal ball and the magic wand at home today for this, but so I don't want to go through all the particular issues again, but I did want just to highlight a couple. First of all, I do want to reiterate that no charter school wants to fall short of providing safe and adequate spaces for their students. And they're willing to work and do the hard things that are necessary to find ways to continue to ensure that they're providing those spaces without losing their ability to make buildings work in light of oftentimes there's no traditional school buildings available for them to use. So they're adapting. So they want to make those buildings as appropriate as possible without losing that autonomy to often have to be a little more creative and out of the box with the spaces that they have. I don't know if I really need to go into the one that's giving them the heartburn the most right now is the point that Director McComey spent quite a bit of time on is this ability statutorily. There's a lot of instability for charters and districts as far as the building is available. If it's not, if they have to move in, if then they have to move out, and how we utilize that. I did want to highlight that, when a district building is not available and there are no buildings available when a charter opens, the charter does move on. They're obligated to provide a facility, and they do that most often using lease agreements with other businesses or third parties to provide those facilities. So the stability of the school relies somewhat on their ability to be good tenants, and so we don't want to see them in a situation where they can't move forward, and yet be cognizant of what is possibly out there. So all to say, we do continue to stand by, ready to work with all the stakeholders to find the solution. I would echo the sentiment today that this is a very big task. There's a lot of details that need to be addressed. There's both sides of the issue that needs to be looked at. And so, we can help bring solutions that we've seen in other states and what those look like and how they've worked through this in the last 25 years. We're certainly not the first state that's had to deal with some of these challenges. So, we believe that all public charter schools, both district approved ones and state approved ones, do need to have facility statutes that provide them equitable treatment, but still allows them to meet their statutory obligations in a way that fits their programmatic efforts. So, potentially we should look for ways that we can separate out charter statutes, specifically on facilities from the district ones that are already in statute, and maybe we look at doing some mirror statutes and falling in more of a way that we can adapt through that. So, Mr. Chairman, we'll continue to work with this committee. If you choose to look at the ways to improve policies, if you decide that the committee is not the place right now, please know that we're going to be continuing to work with the department and the education department and all the charters and all the folks to help bring solutions to the table. So happy to answer any specific questions.
Any questions for Ms. Klein? I will just echo the sentiment that I did to the staff over here. Thank you. I know you've been working your tail off as well. And I will say that it is, I can't say it's been enjoyable, right? But it has been a much better experience to have not only you, but everybody involved trying to work towards a common solution as opposed to being adversarial. And that definitely helps the process. So I just want to publicly say thank you, and thank you to the charter schools and to everybody else that has been involved in this process. So any further public testimony? Seeing, okay. Mr. Bartlett, please come forward.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you. Dave Bartlett, Campbell County School District. Boy, the director covered a lot. Just a couple things. I did not think I was going to come here today and talk charter schools, but just real briefly, I have had the opportunity to work with charter schools, find space, available space, that type of thing. And just from the district standpoint, we're talking about surplusing old buildings. The only thing I would point out, and I believe the co-chair, you mentioned this a little bit, without the crystal ball, you don't know whether you're going to need it in the future or not. But as a district, if I have replaced a facility because it was inadequate, my stance typically is I would like to get that facility off my rolls because of the liability. So while we talk about mothballing or routine or major maintenance and maintaining it, keep in mind the districts also have to make sure that we are ensuring that liability. In the summer, we've got to maintain grounds. And in the winter, we've got to do snow removal. And when we are staffing based on our ADM and, our allowable facilities, it does tax your staff when you've got an empty school that you've got to go over and make sure to maintain. So typically, I would tell you that when we replace a building, it's because it's not adequate. We want it off of our inventory. And so I can appreciate your stance of we don't want to sell a building and then have to lease it back, as has been in the case in the past. But just keep in mind from the district, we are trying to be stewards of local and state dollars as well. So that would be, our approach. In terms of looking at the current BV list, just a couple points. I can tell you when the list came out, the most current one, I think that what you found when the districts came to you and shared their surprise, it was probably more that there was a change in methodology, that we weren't truly aware that we were changing the methodology. I know that we put out an RFP for a new assessment. But I don't believe that the commission, this committee, or the legislature had requested for a new methodology. Now, having said that, can we adapt to it? Most definitely. When you all are talking about the changes in ranks of facilities, our concern more was actually the change in the score themselves. So when you have a building that is a 0.33 and comes in a new system and it's a 0.18. Now, understanding we're looking at some facilities, grounds, parking lots, and some of that may impact it. But I would still point out that when we're looking at that replacement value of building, we're looking at the replacement of what was built, not what we potentially have in place today. And that truly does impact many of the facilities out that we're talking about. So, you look at a building that is 390,000 square feet and its replacement is going to be 300,000. That's got a huge impact on how that score would be, looking at how we would build it under today's standards. So with that, I would stand for any questions. Thank you.
Committee, any questions? Mr. Bartlett? Thanks for making the trip on the other corner of the state. Appreciate it. All right, committee, seeing anything? No, nobody racing to the mic and everything else. We'll close public comment. That puts us about 10 minutes ahead of where we're at for our schedule. So we'll stick to the lunch schedule. That does put us, I think, basically just with the annual report and the budget presentation, which I think are kind of almost one and the same when it comes down to it. So that'll still keep us on track, probably about a 3 to 3:30-ish timeframe. So we'll be back in here at 1:30 and we will start promptly at 1:30 to get the department on their annual report.